Good afternoon. It is Monday, September 20th. We are here for a workshop. The time is 1 p.m. I believe that Ms. Giovanelli will be calling in from perhaps. Ms. Fisher is running a little bit behind, and I'm not sure where Ms. Vaughn's at, but we are here. So thank you all for being here. And we are going to go ahead and start with our first thing on the agenda, which is the agenda review. And today we have Dr. Spiro. Welcome, filling in for Dr. Savage. Dr. Spiro?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start with today's agenda review, and the first question is from the consent agenda for academic services under H2. Answering this will be Dr. Matt Kay. The questions are around the approval of the uniform statewide assessment calendar and the district required progress monitoring schedule. And Dr. Kay, here were the questions that were being asked this afternoon. If you could please advise and explain what this means for our teachers according to the recent announcement from Governor DeSantis ending high stakes testing. And Dr. Kay, there are two questions. First one, I understand it does not end until the end of this school year, but what is the expectation to follow for our teachers? And then the second question will be, will we increase the monitoring schedule, or will it be similar to this one for next year as well? Dr. Kay. So
to the first question regarding impact of this year for teachers and school-based employees, we would still follow our current model. The announcement didn't make any suggestion of change for this year, so we would still be status quo going forward at this point through the remainder of the school year. Regarding progress monitoring for the following year, the announcement was regarding the adoption of a progress monitoring system. We are still waiting to see the details of that, what that will look like. It would have to go through legislative approval. So at that time, when we learn more, and as we learn more, we'll certainly be working together as a division to better align our progress monitoring to meet the interests of our students in the best way possible. But at this time, we just don't have enough information to know or be able to forecast how that would impact our progress monitoring internally for next school year. We have our next assessment meeting September 28th. We are obviously eager to learn more.
Okay, is there any questions, Ms. Gittens?
So they haven't given you really any indication as to what theirs will look like or how closely it would be aligned to ours?
The only thing we know at this time is that the plan is, and again, this is all pending legislative approval, so there could be a lot of, this could evolve, over time, but right now the plan is to have 3 progress monitoring windows throughout the school year. We don't know the length of time that those windows, all we would know is the frequency, but we wouldn't know the extent or duration, and so as we learn more, we will be modifying our own internal schedules as well.
How, and I don't know if you may know this or not, but the first thing that came to my mind is that gap between FSA and switching to a new process. And we always, I won't say lose students, but some students lose in a change. And I just want to make sure that we are very aware of that and those bubble students that FSA, is this and something else. So I guess as we're kind of phasing it in with what we're already doing, it won't be too bad. But I'm really concerned about anytime we switch mechanisms. It's rough on some kids.
Yeah, and those are very valid concerns, and we definitely want to make sure we stay on top of that, and we'll be monitoring that very closely too to develop a plan for that.
And I'll add on there as well, Ms. Giddens. Remember, we also progress monitor, so what the state is recommending is currently what we are doing as well. So as we move forward with the elimination of the FSA the following year, the progress monitoring windows will remain the same, so we'll be able to get that earlier detection that we try to do with progress monitoring anyways.
Right, okay.
So that, I was going to say that, so thank you for saying that. We are already doing that.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
We just don't know what the new one's going to look like.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up. Good afternoon, Ms. Vaughn. We're on
Got it.
H2.
Thank you.
I didn't know if you had any questions regarding that
Nope.
at this time. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kay. Our next one for agenda review, the answer will be provided by Kathy Ebaugh, and this is from the consent agenda for L2. This is approval for the ratification of the agreement to purchase 183.99 acres located at 1700-250 State Road 82 in Fort Myers, Florida. Here are the questions. The questions, Ms. Ebaugh, if you could, two questions. One, if you could please provide more specific examples of what this property might accommodate given anticipated student growth and program needs. And then similarly, the questions were, what is the plan for this property? And then why am I just finding out about this purchase when the appraisals are dated back in April with no discussion prior? I understand that in April, that was the prior administration, but still unacceptable. Ms. Ebaugh.
And then, Ms. Ebaugh, I know Ms. Giovanelli's not here to ask her question because she had sent that question in, and so did Ms. Morgan had a question regarding this as well. So I'm going to have Ms. Morgan step in first. I'll come back
And
to you.
so do I. It just didn't get
Okay,
to
yeah,
Jennifer.
I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Ms. Morgan, did you want to?
No, I mean, I'm waiting to hear
Okay,
the answer to the
perfect.
question.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. The exact use of this property has yet to be determined. There is 163 total acres that we're purchasing. The due diligence has shown us that we can use about 100 of those acres. It's about 100 buildable. There are multiple discussions about what that property may be. As you may recall from our discussion that we had a few weeks ago about the East Zone properties, this was one of the properties we discussed that we're in the process of working with. There are multiple ideas for this property. At 100 acres, it can be used for more than one school. It might be a high school, it might be a middle school, it might be an elementary school, it might even be the tech school for the East Zone. All of this is under consideration right now. This is one of those properties, as we discussed a couple weeks ago, that sometimes we need to buy land because it's available to us and it's in a location that fits our needs. When we've done our assessments of where we want property in the East Zone, this was one of those areas that we identified that there was multiple purposes for a potential site. So we haven't completely determined, obviously, as we continue our discussions with the Capital Committee and with Academic Services about the exact use of this property. We will bring that information forward and have further discussions with the board at the appropriate time. But at this moment, it's just being purchased for us because it's a good piece of property in the right location for us.
Thank you.
In terms of when it has been discussed before the board, we realize that there are a lot of discussions right now about property, and it may sometimes get confusing as to which properties we're talking about, but this property was actually originally brought forward to the board at the January 26, 2021 board meeting, which we asked for permission to purchase the 163 acres and go into the due diligence period. If you recall, a few months ago, we came up with a strategy of schedules for when we needed to bring certain decision points, and this is one of those decision points we need to bring before we go into due diligence. We did that in January, and then it's been on the Capital Board updates as part of your monthly board budget reports every month since then. And then we also, as I mentioned just a second ago, we talked about this as part of the properties that we discussed during the East Zone presentation. So we understand that there's a lot of property that is being discussed, and it's hard to remember what one property is versus another, but this is not the first time we brought this up to it. And this would hopefully, at least in terms of purchasing the property, will be our last discussion, because pending ratification tomorrow evening, we will go into the sale and final purchase of the property. Are there other questions about this?
Ms. Gittens?
Okay, January 26th, I recall the meeting because I asked about a signed document, and Superintendent Atkins responded with, this is not an agreement, this is not the final contract, this is just an agreement to look at the purchase and the property.
That's right.
Well, I received a copy from someone in the county of a signed, executed contract on January, I think it was 6th. It was prior to the meeting on the 26th. And it is an executed contract. And the only thing that was left was, it was signed and executed then. There was a caveat that we had until the end of September if we had any changes or whatever to it. But it was signed and executed in January, prior to this meeting.
So I'm not exactly sure what you would have reviewed. At the January 26th meeting, we would have brought a contract for the review of due diligence. We have not, until now, we had every ability to not purchase this property. If we agree tomorrow evening, this is the ratification. This is the final ratification of the property. We always go into a period for due diligence, and that allows us to evaluate things like environmental, like transportation. We review the title work. We review all of the specific details of the property. Now, there is a contract, and it might have been a draft of the contract. I'm not really sure, Ms. Gittens. I'd have to review and like to see the document you're referring to, but we do enter into a contract to go into due diligence, but it doesn't get officially acquired until ratification, which would happen potentially tomorrow evening, depending on your vote.
Well, it was my understanding, I spoke to the attorney that signed it because I was confused as to what this was. And it is, it's a contract. So we had, yes, you're right, we do have the right to, between January and September, if anything came up with any type of mitigation of the property, that we could get out of it. I guess my main question is, why in January were we told that it was not an executed contract, that it was just a agreement to look at the property and see whether we wanted to go forward? Now, regardless of the legalities of that, we could have easily been told as a board in January that this is how this works, and this is, we have between now and September. To wait until the very last week or so that we could step out of it to say, now we have to do it, we have to sign off on it. I just don't feel that it was as transparent as possible. I would have felt better in January saying, well, we had to do the contract, it's an executed contract, but we have this caveat if there's anything that comes up between now and September. You could have told us that on the board. But we didn't, at least I didn't hear anything from January and saying, oh, we're just talking about it until tomorrow night when we vote on the actual item. And that's the thing that I take umbrance to, because it was something that was discussed. I just don't feel like we're being really transparent about stuff. And I've heard all over town all types of things as to what that property is going to be used for, and so I don't know where all that's coming from, but I just feel like for transparency, we need to let the board know what's going on.
So I'm not sure what was presented to you in January. As you know, Dominic Gemelli would have been the planning director at that point and would have done that presentation. So I'm not exactly sure what was presented to you. In terms of timeline, I can explain this, that we go into, when we are ready to go into due diligence, we go into a contract, it is a contract, an agreement with the seller to, just as they would come into, if we were selling the property, a purchaser would go into a contract with us to evaluate and go into the due diligence period. We can't go into due diligence without a contract that allows for that evaluation. But that contract doesn't stipulate you have to purchase it. What it does is it establishes a time period, in this case to September, to allow us to do an evaluation of the property, as I said, for environmental reasons, for title reasons, for transportation reasons, for site location reasons, all sorts of things that we're evaluating during our due diligence. And then once we've completed our due diligence, we bring it to our site location committee and we confirm with them that this is an appropriate site for us to purchase. At that point, then we bring it to you for ratification. And I'm sorry that we did not provide the level of transparency that you're asking for. We will certainly evaluate our processes and try better in the future. We continue to evaluate and update. Actually, it was before we did this process, the boards, as I understand it, and I wasn't here, but as I've been explained by others, the boards wouldn't even see the documents until now at ratification. So we are continually trying to make our things better, and if there's ways that we can improve, we look to do that. If there's ways that we can be more transparent about property, we look to do so. We don't, again, always know what we are purchasing a property for, so that there are lots of discussions in the community about what this property may be makes complete sense, because we're having a lot of those discussions ourselves. There's a lot of ideas about what this property could be. There's no confirmed determination as what it will be. And so again, we are always looking to update our processes. We're always looking to make things better. I know that this was done better than others, where you didn't even see them until ratification, but that doesn't mean that there isn't continued room for improvement, and we will look to do so.
Can I just say one last thing? A few months ago, you all sat and gave us a presentation about the process, and I don't know that we have we put that into place, because the items that were stated on there did not follow through with the purchase of this property and even what's going to happen to it.
Well, again, we did say during that process that we would bring to the board property that we were considering for contract, which is what we did with this property, and that we would bring it forward again after site location, which is what we're doing with this property. If there's opportunities for us to add things, we certainly can, and yes, we do use it to the best of our ability, and we do use that process to the best of our ability. If there's ways for us to make improvements, we certainly will look to do so and continuously improve our transparency. Understand, though, when you are dealing with property purchases, there is some level of
Discretion. I
discretion
understand
that
what
we,
you're saying.
thank you,
Right.
discretion is a good word. There's some level of discretion that we may need to keep as we're evaluating properties, because when property owners realize it's the school board that is purchasing it, or any public entity actually that's purchasing a piece of property, it makes them think that there might be additional funds, and sometimes we don't want that information about who the potential purchaser of the property is. So we will try, as I said, we always look to make things better. I do believe this one was better than ones that were done in the past, and I continually look for and encourage you to provide input as to how we can make things better going forward, whether it's in a public forum like this, whether it's through your one-on-ones, whether it's through the board reports. We're open to suggestions on how we can make this, provide you as much information as we can within the discretion of the transaction.
I guess this is the last thing I'm going to say, though, but I guess for the public, when we're spending taxpayer money and funds in the process somewhere, I understand about keeping, it on the down low so that they don't raise the price, but then, it's kind of, do you let the public know and give input? Or do you, keep the purchaser over here? There's got to be a fine line in there, but in our process, we need, if we're going to spend, $2.9 million on a property, and actually it came out to like $3 million, that the public should, I think, be aware of that process and what it's going to be. And I understand that you say we purchase it and we don't know what it's going to be used for. I really think, though, and this is just me speaking, our planning needs to be more, we're purchasing it and it can either be this or this, and not just purchasing the, for whatever. So thank you for your comments.
I appreciate that, and we will always continue to look to make things better.
Thank you. And Chair Jordan, those are all the questions that were officially submitted.
I had a question. I don't know why it didn't come across. I put it in my little note thing and it vanished. But my question was on J1, and that's regarding the personnel recommendations. And the question that I have with that is, I thought we were told some time ago that we were only having 2 associate principals in the district, and those 2 were going to certain schools to fulfill those needs, and then they would go on to those schools as being the principals. One, did we advertise for the one for the assistant principal that just turned into the associate principal at Fort Myers Middle? Did we advertise for that? And 2, if we move that person up to the associate principal, are we filling the assistant principal, or are we leaving it as such? Because I know we added that one person who was originally there, who has been moved, and that gave them an extra person, because that person was supposed to learn everything and take that over upon retirement, just as the one in Lehigh. So now we've moved that person, and this is another one. So can you kind of
Sure, and
help me
then
with this?
looking to see if anybody from Human Resources was in here, but I do believe and I can verify for you, yes, this
Let me
position
know
was,
later.
yes, it was advertised, so I do know that the position was advertised. And as far as it being an extra position or replacing a position, that I would have to get back with you to determine, to let you know if
I'd
that's,
just like to know that.
yes, we'll make sure we share that in the weekly update for the board.
Thank you.
And can I ask one thing?
Yes.
So was it advertised as an associate principal position or an assistant principal position?
It was advertised as an associate principal position.
Okay.
So I have another question then. So, because we only had 2 budgeted for associate principals. So this third one, where did that come in the budget as well? So that's another question, if you could answer.
Yes, and I do not have it with me today, but I certainly will follow up on all of those questions around the advertisement, whether it's not an extra one, and then the budgeting for those positions.
Correct. And the person that was originally scheduled to be there, would they have an option to be that principal going forward in the future?
Thank you.
I just think we need to make sure we're taking care of our people.
I'm sorry, I have one more thing on
Ms.
that too.
Gittens?
Yeah, and I totally
Sorry,
agree
Ms.
with what Ms. Jordan is saying about that, because honestly, it's almost like the associate principalship should be somebody that's there, is the way it was presented, that knows the school and all of that. To me, it's a bit demoralizing if I'm an assistant principal, one of 3 or 4 at a school, and the district understands that our principal is going to be retiring or whatever, and then you bring in someone else, because the way the associate principal position was brought forth is that someone who has been there, who knows the school and has worked with the kids and the staff and is able to move in. And it's kind of demoralizing if I'm an AP at that school and have done all of that, and somebody comes in from somewhere else, instead of them being an AP, they come in basically over me as an associate.
And you are
then-
correct. The way the model was set up for the associate principal is someone who is ready to be a principal. We know that a principal is going to be getting ready to retire in the future, so that individual would go to that school, they either from that school or go to that school and immerse themselves in the culture of that school, learn the systems, and that way there would be a smooth transition from one to the other. Now, certainly there's never a guarantee that that associate principal gets that job. There certainly is still the interview process and the selection process, all that still has to be followed through, but this is someone who is in line and they're ready to go.
So you're saying that the associate principal doesn't necessarily just automatically become the principal?
Not necessarily. Does not guarantee them that job at that school. No, there's still a hiring process.
So I guess that's what's confusing to me about it. Then what is the point of having it? Why are they, why is it another level and they're above everybody else that's doing the same job? And they're getting paid more money to do it. If you're the associate principal, you kind of think, okay, when Susie walks out the door, I'm it. But you're saying, no, I still have to put my hat in the ring, so all the other assistant principals could do the same.
Correct. And the way that structure was set up with Human Resources was they still have to apply for and then interview for the particular position for the principalship.
I just feel like it's an extra level that's not needed, but thank you.
Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, so to put this to bed, I actually was planning to bring up good of the order that we need to create a policy with respect to recruiting, hiring, onboarding administrators at a certain level, because I don't think we have a process in place that provides the clarity that we feel comfortable with. Mm-hmm. So I will be bringing that up for good of the order.
Thank you. Ms. Giovanelli, are you here?
I heard something, but.
I am.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't hearing things. So did you have any questions? We are to our next question as far as, we're just finishing up the agenda. Did you have anything else to add to that? Because we're moving on to our next topic.
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And welcome. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Spiro.
Thank you.
So next on the agenda is the spring assessment. And that is, Dr. Matt Kay again. And are you just going to be speaking, or is everyone else that's on this list?
I think we're going to go in 2 phases. So
Okay.
me and then the rest of the team.
They always have you up here by yourself sitting. What is that? What did you do to them?
To quickly.
And then we lock you in too, so.
Excuse me?
And then we lock you in with the gates.
It's good motivation.
Last time Dr. K presented, he thought he was first, so we sat at the
I know,
table,
that's why
and then we went into the agenda review, so he patiently waited a good hour
I saw that.
presentation, so I'm glad Dr.
I didn't
K
do that
is
this
here.
time.
But that was great. You live and you learn.
So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Matt Kay, who's going to be presenting this afternoon a little bit of an analysis of our spring assessment data at a very high level with all the information that we have. And then when Dr. Kay is done, we're going to transition to our school development executive directors who are going to talk to us a little bit about, well, what does that mean for the schools now? What is happening in the buildings now? What's the reality of where we are in the building now?
Thank you.
And so at this time, Dr. Kay, the floor is yours whenever you're ready, sir.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I believe Ms. McClung is going to drive for me over there. Is that correct?
We get a clicker.
Okay. All right. Very good. So good afternoon. Thank you for having me back again. This is intended to be an update of our spring assessment results for the 2021 school year. So we're going to begin by taking a look at the context of our assessment. So as everyone knows, it wouldn't take any reminder, but the 2021 assessment series was administered under unique circumstances. And spring of 2020, March 13th, I recall it was actually a Friday, I believe, if I recall correctly, Friday the 13th, our school district began closing schools for what was anticipated to be a brief closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that turned into the remainder of the fourth quarter. And then beginning the following school year, we came back, and like many districts throughout the country, we had to adapt to the circumstances without any real precedent. So in Lee County, there were 3 primary learning modalities offered: traditional face-to-face instruction, what was called Lee Home Connect, which was our virtual but synchronous instructional model, and then our Lee Virtual School franchise. And so the one caveat I want to put in there as well is with all of these, there wasn't much of a precedent for the Lee Home Connect, but with the face-to-face, that instruction was also provided with mitigation efforts in place, health mitigation efforts as well. We, as a district, did extend our family support to all students. We put in unusually high levels of resources to provide things like meals, transportation, student services, as well as, when it came time for the assessment series, to encourage as many students as possible to take the assessments with the FLDOE assessment cycle. And so for Lee County, when we received our results from the state, we had a 95% tested reporting number. That's a strong number that would have qualified us for any sort of validity from the state. What we don't have at this time is the context for other districts. We don't know the percent tested at those other districts or other schools throughout the state. So it makes comparisons in some ways rather difficult when we're looking at if Lee County had a 95% tested or a particular school had 97% tested. Our ability to contextualize that with other districts and schools right now is limited due to that percent tested not being available yet. So next, we wanted to kind of give some context as to what we're learning early on from national research. There are some national research reports already released beginning in early August. And one of the terms that has been coming out consistently is missed learning. We heard a lot about the term learning loss. That term is out there as well, but that kind of implies that students forgot things. Rather, what we're seeing is students did learn and there was progress throughout the school year, but it was not at the speed or volume that we're accustomed to seeing. So the term missed learning is kind of an indication that there was learning, but it was not at the extent that we're usually seeing year over year. So what we'd anticipate from our national research and here in Lee County as well is that the results would be below what they were in prior years without, again, much context to compare it to in other areas. We also know from the research that this missed learning phenomenon tended to have a higher impact on younger students. So as you go to the younger age levels, elementary school, for example, you would see a higher impact of this missed learning phenomenon, as well as students with less access to in-person learning. We saw a phenomenon there as well of missed learning, particularly if they had less access to in-person learning, if they had less access to consistent quality technology as well. So you have a socioeconomic dynamic there as well at play. And then finally, a higher impact in mathematics. And that, again, is consistent throughout our results that we received here in Lee County, as well as the state and at national level research. So we had two key questions that we wanted to begin by addressing when we first got our results. The first one was, how severe was the missed learning in Lee County within the context of the state? Again, there is some missing information we do not yet have at the state level, but we can begin to start to analyze that. And then the second one was, how did students in Lee County perform on statewide assessments based on the learning modalities that were offered here in Lee County? Again, every district being different in how they responded to that. So the first question we tried to address by looking at our data and then state level data. So what you see here on the first slide would be our 5-year trend in state academic components. This is inclusive only of students who were included in the school or district grade model. So just as a reminder for assessment, you may have X number of students at a school take an assessment. Not every one of them is included in the school grade component model, right? So a school may receive a student from Nebraska a week before, and if that student takes the assessment, they wouldn't be included in these data. So this is school and district grade component. You see a decline across our categories. This is consistent with state and national level reporting as a result of or at least partially as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on student learning. As we go to the next slide, we begin to look at our comparisons to state level data. So this is data reported by the state. We have a switch here on the students we're looking at. I just want to point that out. It's in the bottom left-hand corner. Now we're looking at all students who took the assessment. So what we have obviously both forms of data we can look at our district level, but we can only compare to the state what they report. So at this point, we're looking at all test takers. And so the first slide is going to look at ELA, English Language Arts Proficiency, across 3 grade groupings, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 10. And the lighter shades bar graphs are going to show the state and district outputs in 2019, and then the darker shades are going to show the state and district results in 2021. And one of the things we wanted to start to look at to respond to our first question was how severe was that missed learning in Lee County, was to try to get some comparison to the state level. So what are we seeing at the state and what are we seeing in Lee County? And so we can begin by seeing that the result across the state, and you're going to see on all of these components, is a decline, right? There's missed learning happened as a result of this. But what we want to understand is how did that missed learning happen in Lee County compared to state comparisons, right? And so one of the things we can start to measure is what was our gap to the state prior, and how did that gap change in this reporting cycle, right? So as we look at ELA proficiency, we can see, for example, in grade 3 through 5, that our gap with the state grew by 1 percentage point, right? So we had what we call like a negative increase in gap, right? And the same is true for grades 6 through 8 ELA, and then again, grades 9 and 10, you actually saw an improvement in our gap with the state of 2 points. Again, a reminder, this is all students who took the assessment, so this would not be necessarily equivalent to school grade or district grade components, just to keep that in mind. So as we go to the next slide, we can look at grades 3 through 5 and 6 through 8 math proficiency. As you can see here, in grades 3 through 5 math proficiency, we narrowed that gap with the state. We previously had a 2-point gap, and now we are even with the state, right? So again, at first blush, you're going to look at this and say that, wow, there's tremendous missed learning. But as that was a consistent phenomenon throughout the state, in order to contextualize that, we want to look at how do these gaps compare throughout the state. Grades 6 through 8 math proficiency, we had previously a 2-point positive gap that narrowed to 0, and we matched state proficiency. As we move to algebra and geometry, one reminder here, algebra and geometry are a blend of middle school and high school. So as these stand out separately, they could be across that spectrum. Any sort of progression changes you make in the middle school level or high school level obviously will have an impact. So over 2 years, that has to be something to keep in mind as well. In algebra, we increased, we narrowed the gap with the state by 1 point, and in geometry by 8 points to pull even with state proficiency in geometry. On to science. Across the board in our sciences, we narrowed our gap with the state across grade 5 science, grade 8 science, and in biology. So we now report across sciences, what we're starting to see and what becomes a trend over these is a bit of a weathering compared to the state in how these impacts of missed learning occur. All right, so biology in particular stands out with a 5-point narrowing of that state gap. And then finally on to social studies, where we see with civics and U.S. history, both improved their comparison to the state, 4% at the middle school civics level and 3% at the high school U.S. history level. So on to the next piece, and this is where we kind of can plot this out. So across these 4 quadrants, there's quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4. We wanted to plot these out, and we're looking at 2 key indicators here, right? We're looking at how did we do in comparison to a state achievement, but given the unusual context of last year, we also want to see how did we change compared to state changes, because we know across the board there were negative impacts of this. So to simply say we went up or down is not a way we would want to look at it in this context. Instead, looking at a much larger sample with the state of Florida, we want to see how were we impacted by COVID-19, and or how were our mitigation efforts effective? How effective were they at the state level? So across your left to right or across the horizon, you'll see a comparison to state achievement by these groupings, right? So if you're on the left, you lagged behind state achievement. If you're on the right, you exceeded state achievement, and they'd be plotted out there. But then across your vertical axis going up and down, you can see how we did compared to the change at the state level. So anything below the 0 horizon would be we had a negative change, and anything above that would mean that we narrowed that gap with the state. And the last thing I would add to this is, as we look at this, I think our team, when analyzing this, we would encourage to look at this as a whole, because we're looking at how the mitigation efforts affected on a whole. We have, in any given year, it can be misleading to look at singular points because of progression changes, cohort impacts, all of these variables that can impact how one particular group might change if you start changing your progression. But when you look at the whole, if you were to kind of connect these dots and create a solid object, where would that district live? And it looks like, I believe it was 9 of the 12, we were in quadrant 2, which quadrant 2 means that you had lower than state average on proficiency, but a lesser decline. So as you are looking at these efforts and what happened last year, that's kind of the big question, is what happened compared to the state. We see that, yes, like other years, there maybe was not a matching or exceeding of state proficiency, but the mitigation efforts may have been successful in some of these areas where we see the negative impact at the state level was more severe than it was at the district level. Okay, and I believe the next slide is an explainer of one of those points to kind of just give some context there. So that brings us to our key findings of that first question, and I want to go through those really quickly and then give a couple other aspects of that. But the first question was, how severe was the missed learning in Lee County compared to the state of Florida? So as with state and national level research, we do see that there's missed learning. That would be something that would be consistent at the state and national level. There were declines in student proficiency in Lee County in the spring 2021 assessments. To some extent, we believe that was mitigated, or we weathered that with our efforts, in part because of the comparison to how the state decline was versus the declines in Lee County. And then finally, as I mentioned before, that was in 9 of those 12 academic student groupings. So I want to kind of take a pause there before we move on to the next section, because the next one looks at data from another angle to it. But I want to take a break and see if there are any questions about that particular set.
Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, so I have
And Ms. Vaughn?
several questions. Back on slide 6, your 5-year trend. And I hadn't looked at this before, but your 5-year trend in English language arts, mathematics, and social studies is positive until COVID. But in fact, you were losing ground in science before COVID. So the question is, to what do you attribute that? Our inability to hire science teachers, the materials we're using, I was just struck by that. And you don't have to answer this question now, so I'm just going to put the questions out there. And then on slide 7, English language arts. So we lost ground both for elementary and middle, but we gained ground at the high school level. To what do we attribute the fact that we gained at the high school when we're losing ground in elementary and middle? And then on slide 8, I'm looking at grades 6 through 8 math proficiency. And I'm wondering, and this is when I started asking myself, I wonder if you all are looking at these by schools. And I wonder if you're seeing schools that are doing well relative to one another in the district and those that are doing poorly. Because, yes, we maintained, which was great. I mean, we did really well, actually, on this. But how? Why? What was different? So that's a question. And then my last question is a comment. So kudos for where we held our place in algebra, geometry, math 3 to 5, grade 5 science, grade 8 science, bio. We lost ground, but less ground than the state in civics and U.S. history. We dropped more than the state in English language arts. So again, my question is, where we're losing ground within the district, can we find information? And then across the state, can we identify schools that did well relative to us? And are we looking at them in terms of what mitigation they provided that supported them? And I think I spoke to Dr. Savage about Indian River. I don't think I spoke to you. But Indian River had a 95% participation rate, and they did really well. So, those are the questions that I ask when I look at this data.
Yeah, and so I just kind of go through those. I think, as the kind of you alluded, I hesitate to respond to the science question. That definitely would be, a whole division type response to that one. Regarding the others, as to attribute, again, I wouldn't necessarily attribute anything in particular to these results. I would point out that, particularly with ELA, just as a reminder, these are inclusive of all students who took the assessments. And the only reason I wanted to add that for context is that throughout the state of Florida, you have a variety of different movements that are happening, sometimes isolated or more pronounced in certain districts than in others. So that would be something that we would want to look at more at a deeper level when we have school grade component results. If you're a district, for example, that may have a particularly high mobility rate, those things could factor into these macro level results that when we look at it from an accountability perspective and only include students, that, unfortunately, we don't have the comparables from the state on that yet. So that would be something that would be very interesting to look at more deeply and see, are these trends things that persist within particular disciplines, or do they possibly have demographic impacts as well that we could better understand or contextualize?
And so that's basic. Those are the questions I'm asking. And I wonder if maybe when we do a presentation like this again, when we're basically looking at data at the 30,000 foot level. Mm-hmm. So, one of the comments that might be made by the various departments is, what questions has the data brought forward for us to pursue? Mm-hmm. Which questions can we pursue today because we have the data, and which questions do we have to wait because we simply don't have the information we need? So, thank you.
Ms. Vaughn, please. Thank you, Ms. Morgan.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. You certainly know how to put data on charts and graphs and all of that. As a former English teacher, yes, I always looked at data, but the thing that I looked at, and Ms. Morgan touched on that, is why? What was the problem? And a couple things that I wanted to ask about, and something also that Ms. Morgan just mentioned, is I'd be interested in the various schools and how the schools did. And of course, whenever you look at the schools, you cannot discount their own demographics within that school, because they're going to be schools, and Sanibel is the easiest one to use, where it's small and it's a very, very, it's an enclosed community, and there's a lot of scaffolding there with the kids. One of the first questions that I have is, okay, when you had the slide on missed learning phenomenon, you mentioned the younger children, and you also mentioned students who have less access to in-person learning. Do we have any figures on percentages? Were there fewer or more of the young children, the elementary age kids, that were in person versus virtual?
That's in the next section where we'll go over, and I'll talk about kind of the methodology as to how that was compiled. But if that isn't completely answered, then we can certainly work on getting you those data.
Okay, because I think that makes a difference. And I know that when this first all started, I went to a high school and observed a couple high school classes with, I think mostly, there were juniors and seniors in the class. And then another day I went to an elementary and watched a teacher, and well, one of the big differences was the elementary teacher did not have a hybrid class. And I was really impressed with the way the kids interacted. But something else that struck me is with moving from class to class with the upper level kids, I think probably the older kids, did you count in that they just had more, obviously, more experience with school, more flexibility, variety in that they moved from class to class. And I think probably with so many of the younger kids who weren't in person, and I don't know that there's any way you can get this data in terms of how many of them had an adult there that actually participated in some way for the child. I'm not trying to hint that there's some kids that are just like a 6-year-old left by himself or herself, but what I'm saying is may have a parent or an adult there in the home, but not, is there any discussion of that? Just the anecdote. See, I'm really big on the anecdotal things because I think that's where you really get underneath the data.
Well,
Any anecdotal on any of that?
Now, let me go ahead and respond a little bit at Ms. Funk, because one of the pieces we talked a lot about last year, the anecdotal data, was what you just alluded to, that we know that the fidelity of all the students at home may not have been as pure as we hoped it would be, and that's what our progress monitoring data initially indicated. We also know last year was not a normal year. So we think about the movement of kids going from one model to the next model, coming back to another model. We also got to think about, though we had 95% tested as a district, that varies school to school as well. So when we look at the data and we talk about going school by school, which we do, we do analyze school by school. When we look at that data, it's also, you got to take into account what was the percent of students tested at that particular building, which is a big tell, because yes, demographics play a part in it, but also the number of students that are tested.
Okay, and just one other question that I wrote down. Did we, and you may have this elsewhere, or probably we can look at DOE for some of this, when we looked at it to analyze, well, where are our shortcomings, did we look at demographics in terms of family income and also in terms of ethnicity and our special needs kids in ESL or ESOL? Did we break it down, and were there larger gaps between us and the state in some of these areas, like low-income families here versus elsewhere, and those kinds of things?
In this particular report from my section, that won't be in there. I do know that my colleagues who will be coming forward, they'll be talking in part about their school tiering process, and that will be heavily involved in the tiering as far as support goes. I'll let them explain that more completely than I would. But those are data that we include as a variety of points to help determine how to provide that tiering process for us. So I do want to defer to them when it's their turn.
Okay, and are we already working on where we see the breakdown of the data, not the overall, but when we look at the different subgroups, are we already working on theories on why this happened and how we can mitigate it for this year and moving forward?
Yes, and also that's something we also do pretty frequently with our Division of Diversity with Jared Eady. We work on our diversity report that includes a lot of academic reporting as well. So we start targeting certain areas that maybe the data is revealing are particular areas of need. So.
I'm just going to go back to what I said in the beginning. You can look for areas of need all day, but unless you have a solution and a way to solve it and the why, we're just going to have a bunch of pretty charts and graphs and all of that as an analysis, but not the
I'm
real
sorry,
nitty-gritty.
Ms. Giovanelli, I'm so sorry. Ms. Giovanelli, can you please mute yourself? Thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Vaughn.
And not the real nitty-gritty of what do we have to do to solve it? That's what I'm most interested in.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And I do think more of that will be coming in this presentation. I just paused for the questions at this point, but I do believe that my colleagues will have.
Good. Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Ms. Gittens?
Okay, my first one on slide 3, when it's talking about the mislearning phenomena, the thing that's missing there to me is how the digital divide affected this whole concept, because I can't help but think that's a major piece of this, and perhaps it should be on that particular slide as well. Then going on to, and maybe I can ask you that, how are we looking at that as an effect to this missed learning or learning loss?
You know, one of the things I mentioned verbally, I did not have it in the text of this particular slide, was that, to your very point, it was not just a lack of access to in-person learning, but also if the students were learning remotely, there was a tremendous influence about, particularly with socioeconomics, as far as do you have consistent access to technology needed. So you have, 2 students who were schooling from home all year. Those outcomes may be very different depending on the resources available to that student and that family. So I think that's a very valid point. I think that definitely belongs alongside any of these variables when it impacts student outcomes.
Yeah, I really think it's supremely important to put.
And that's confirmed by all the national research as well. That is a huge variable
to put into this mix. And then let's see, I think it was slide 12. I had a quick question.
Just to reference, I don't have the slide numbers printed out here, so I gotta.
Oh, okay. Hold on one second for me. It was the quadrant analysis, the first one.
Okay.
Comparing the state and so just looking at this from a high level, it's basically saying that we had lower or less proficiency than the state in most of what we did. Is that
correct? If this were broken apart by individual grade levels, which we do have that as well, it just tended to get a little clustered on there, and we didn't have great state level comparisons on all of those. But there would be some grade levels that would expand out from their grouping a little bit, left, right, up, down. But the general takeaway that I would apply here, myself with reading this, would be that for the majority of these groupings, 9 of the 12, the Lee County was up in that upper left-hand quadrant, quadrant 2, which implies that there says that there was a lower proficiency but a lesser decline than the state average. And so that was one of the things we wanted to examine was how did the COVID-19 pandemic or the school year, how did it impact student learning compared to the state?
And then when you go back to the one on comparing the state, to me it's slide 10, but it has change in achievement in science.
Mm-hmm.
And if you, okay, so for example, on biology, it's 67. And if you just compare the state to the state, they dropped by 5%. And if you compare, Lee County to Lee County, we stayed the same. Does that make sense? Because when I first look at that, that's what I was thinking, that we're not.
Correct, yeah. So the state had a decline in proficiency in biology, but Lee County did not. So while Lee County held steady, they improved their gap to the state average.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that was a little bit confusing. My bottom line to it is looking at, like Ms. Morgan mentioned, the schools and the specific areas, because I think that digital divide piece that was so challenging for us during that time is, I know on some of the other data that we have seen, it has shown a drastic difference in an area where there was fewer challenges digitally, and those where there were more challenges. And when you start out with the ones with the more challenges, they already started out with the with the wider achievement gap, and it just broadened it.
A snowball effect.
It just made it even worse. So,
Ms. Gittens and the executive directors, when they're come up to do their report about the school support, they're going to talk to you about how they looked at each school and then provided specific targeted support for each school based around various content that they would need based in that school, because not everything is the same for every school, really an analysis of each and every school. And so they're going to talk a little bit about that as well, and hopefully that'll address some of your questions, and certainly they'll be the experts and they'll be able to answer other questions also.
because I think as we look at this, and as you look at the data and think, what can we do? And we realize that the digital piece was a major piece. Are we, or did we at the beginning of this school year start out making sure that all those children had a Chromebook to take home?
A number of things. Also, in addition to, how do we onboard students who have not been in school since we did packets for a year and a half? And we had specifically worked with our principals on making sure that there was the relationship building, reviewing processes and systems, all of those components, because of just like you said, there may have been that digital divide, and then some students may have not even been in a school for over a year and a half.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, and I'll go too.
Yeah, just quick, but isn't the digital divide, by and large, isn't it a byproduct of family income for the most part? So when we're looking at digital divide, it's probably reflecting that same family income level that we've mentioned. Am I correct in that?
Yes, ma'am. And without going into all the details, I do know that when they go over their tiering process, some of those criteria are economic criteria. So you look at things like free reduced lunch and other criteria that, if not directly measuring digital divide, they are in association with digital divide. So economic criteria would kind of address those concerns when they're working with their school tiering. And I do want to give them the chance to explain that thoroughly.
Okay, but
And then I would also,
I mean, it's just common sense that
Economic indicator.
for the most part, I'm not going to say everyone, but for the most part, those without those kind of access would be low family income or other manifestations of, for instance, homeless children in the foster care system. So there's I guess a subgroup of those who don't have that, and that would be another interesting look-see to see how those in the foster care system did, because often those children are bounced around to various homes. So we've got lots of those subgroups, or I don't know, mini groups, I don't know what you call them.
I just wanted to remind our board members to remember Mr. Davis used to come up here and he talked to us about what they try to do to overcome that digital divide. And I also know specifically used the example of foster children. So I know we in student services, they actually delivered to foster families Chromebooks while they were at home to make sure that they had access. So I know I'm sure we didn't reach every child. There definitely was a concerted effort and a variety of opportunities for us to reach as many children as possible.
Thank you. Ms. Patrica?
And that was my question. We're talking about a digital divide, and it was my understanding that we had purchased enough, not during the fourth quarter shutdown, but last year, that students had access to one-on-one devices regardless of grade level and hotspots. So to what extent was there an actual digital divide?
So everything you said is correct. We did purchase enough for one-on-one in elementary schools, for example. They took apart the carts and they were bringing out to the families. We started doing when families had a lot of children in the house, giving more than one. There was a lot of mechanisms we put in place in the beginning, and then we purchased more and got to the one-on-one. As far as I can certainly get with Mr. Alton and his team to find out what was the end result of that now that we're a year and a half out. What does that mean now?
I think I remember, and my numbers might be a little bit off, but I think I remember there are 13,000 school districts in the country. We were amongst 1% or 130 school districts that was able to bridge the digital divide during the last school year. So it's important. I mean, I get the demographic breakdown and looking at, why we are where we are and how to overcome it. But I want to know if the digital divide is really an issue in Lee County, or is it a perception? Please and thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for that too, Ms. Patrica. But I do believe that what Dr. Spire said, there were multiple families that they were giving out one or two, and they had 5 or 6 kids in the house. Yes. So those children were still having to wait for their time to use that. So if they were on Home Connect, they all could not be on Home Connect at the same time due to the fact that there's 2 computers here and there's 5 kids. So that was definitely true. And even with the hotspots, there were plenty of places out in our community where they still were not able to connect, or the ability to connect as maybe we would be able to do, or my families would be able to do. So I do definitely believe that there was, I don't know how we ever find those numbers out, but I think it's worth, looking at for sure.
I do too.
But we did do better than most counties or most districts around the area. Ms. Giovanelli, did you have any, and hi, Ms. Fisher. Ms. Giovanelli, did you have any questions?
No, I'm about to take off with that airplane, so.
Okay, well, be safe. Ms. Fisher, did you have any comments or?
Not right at this
now?
time.
Okay.
I'll catch
Thank
up
you.
and then.
Thank you, Dr. Kay.
Okay, so the other aspect we wanted to look at was by learning modality. So let me just go ahead and flip here. And so as I mentioned when we first began this presentation, there were 2 key questions. So the first one was, how did Lee County perform compared to state averages? This one is looking at learning modalities. So remember, we had 3 primary learning modalities: the face-to-face in-person instruction with the health mitigation effects. We also had Lee Home Connect, which was a synchronous teaching style, and then we had Lee Virtual School. So we wanted to think about how would we report this, and I want to preface this with there's a variety of different variables that affect students. So this is one way to look at it. There's more to learn, and so I think back to Ms. Gitten's point earlier, there's a tremendous amount of lurking variables that can affect student outcomes. So when we break it down, there's different aspects that you have to decide, and so this is one way to look at it. But the model we used was we had based on students' prior year achievement level in that discipline. So we would have to go back 2 years to look at it. So if you're looking at a 7th grader, we want to start, well, what was their, and we're looking at reading, say. We want to look at, well, what was their reading level in 5th grade, and then how did they come out on these learning modalities, right? And the other thing that we put into this methodology was they had to participate in this model all year long. As you know, there was movement, mobility. Students came out of one model, went to the other. It would be very difficult to label them as a Lee Home Connect kid or as a face-to-face kids. So we only chose kids that were in that model throughout the entire year. And I'll talk in a minute about how that may also impact some of these results as well. So the first slide is kind of just a brief explanation of how to look at this. But I want to just walk us through this one, and then hopefully it'll make the rest of the slides, because they're all the same format, more easy to navigate. So you'll see 3 sets of bar graphs presented here, right? And the 3 colors represent our 3 learning modalities. So dark blue is face-to-face, orange was Lee Home Connect, and yellow was Lee Virtual School. And these were they had to be in that model all year. They couldn't move in and out, otherwise they wouldn't be included in this. So when you add up the sample sizes or the numbers at the bottom, it will not equate to all the students in the school district by a decent measure. And so at the bottom of each of these, you'll see the student sample size, the number, and at the top you'll see the proficiency of that group. And then we broke it down by their prior year ability level. So they also would have had to have a prior year achievement score for us to be included in this. And so we grouped prior year level 1s of a discipline. That would have been the lowest level of achievement. Prior year level 2s. And then we grouped prior year proficient students. So 3s, 4s, and 5s grouped together. So you'll see those sample sizes will get much larger because you're grouping 3 levels together. And then we said, well, what was the outcome on this year's assessment within that discipline for these students? And how did that compare by model? And what we saw from, again, national level research was that particularly at the younger levels, we saw, and particularly in mathematics, we saw a substantial impact when it came to the benefits of in-person face-to-face instruction. As the students get older, that does tend to kind of recede a little bit, but that is something that throughout mathematics in particular was a consistent factor. And there's lots of different speculations and hypotheses as to why that could be. So as we go through these, Ms. McClung will just kind of walk us through each one of these at a time. But first I want to look at elementary school. And the first one we have is ELA, or English Language Arts. And as you can see here, if we look at, for example, prior year level 1s, we have 9% of prior year level 1s were proficient if they were in face-to-face full year, compared to 3% who were proficient if they were in full year Lee Home Connect. And the sample sizes are at the bottom, and then the 17% for Lee Virtual School. As you'll notice at the end of that one, the sample sizes are particularly small because it's not common for very young children to be in Lee Virtual School year-round, particularly if they have a history of academic struggle. So that doesn't tend to be the characteristic of a student like that. So those sample sizes get very small, and it makes it very difficult to include those, but there was a request to look at all 3 models, so we want to make sure all 3 were in there. The same persists for level 2, prior year level 2 readers. You can see there's an outperformance on the face-to-face. And then when you get into the prior year proficient, that tends to flatten out, or even you see sometimes an inversion. One thing I do want to point out about these data is that, again, they would have had to be in that model all year long. As we know, there was a substantial effort, particularly in the middle of the year, to bring students back to the classroom if they were struggling. So the students who would have completed the entire year in Lee Home Connect would have likely been those who were doing well at a certain point. Not necessarily, not all of them necessarily came back, but that would affect that sample to a degree. So this is, again, one way to look at it. If we go to mathematics, you'll see a similar effect, particularly at the level 2, and even up into the more proficient students. You'll see the outcomes again show that face-to-face instruction those students had a better outcome. That does not necessarily mean that these are always the apples-to-apples students, right? Because again, we're trying to level the composition here, but they're not always the same kid. Back to Ms. Gitten's point previously, socioeconomics may play a substantial impact in here, right? Students who were in Lee Home Connect throughout the year may be socioeconomically differently composed than students who were in person. So again, this is not to necessarily say that statistically this is a valid look at. This is just looking at performance based on these modalities. Again, in science, you see a similar effect as well. For science and social studies, just to notify the board, the prior year metric would have been their reading score, or ELA, because not all of them would have had a prior year science or social studies. They don't always assess year over year. Okay, on to middle school. The ELA level, again, this is where we start to see a shift. As you get into the older levels, sometimes the impacts become blunted or, in fact, inverted. I would hesitate at this point to speculate as to why that is. There's lots of possible reasons, and there's more data to analyze when it comes to that. But we move on to mathematics, and we see that trend consistent with national research again suggests that particularly For students, particularly for weaker students in a particular discipline, face-to-face instruction in mathematics was very important. On to science. At the lower levels, again, they can kind of hold. This is based on ELA, so be going back to your ELA for a prior year assessment, and as well as social studies on the following slide. Okay. And then into the high school level, this is where you're going to have your oldest group. I believe Ms. Vaughn mentioned earlier that the older students tended to have more familiarity with technology. So you start to see a leveling in some areas. This is ELA. Just looking at it visually, the discrepancy is not as stark by learning modality. Going into mathematics, again, you would see that trend is there again. Mathematics did tend to have a difference in modality. On to science. And finally, social studies. Again, you kind of get a mixed bag going back to literacy. So under the key findings for question 2, again, we saw modality differences tended to be most pronounced at the elementary level. They tended also to be consistent throughout mathematics. And again, this is consistent with national trends. So I want to take a minute to pause there because this is looking at it by modality. As I said, there are a lot of other factors that can come into play here. You have things like socioeconomics, who would have stuck with a particular modality throughout the year matters. So I want to take a break and see if there's any questions about those data. And then I believe we have one more section.
Okay, so is there any questions just regarding that little segment that he just spoke on, Ms. Gittens?
Yes, I was just a little confused with that. As I'm looking at the high school, comparing the high school, middle school, and all that. So this is saying there were more of the home connect at the middle and high school level? Am I looking at that correctly?
I'd have to go back and look at my sizing there.
Maybe, I don't know if I'm mixing up the participation in those programs, or is this just showing the academic achievement in the programs?
This is showing, so for example, if we're looking at the bar graph up here, the high school science, right? The percentages at the top are showing the proficiency, what percentage of those students were proficient on the assessment at the end of the year. So for example, if we look at the prior year level ones, of the students who were full-time in person, there were 461 of those that we have that were prior year level ones. 7% of them were proficient at the end of the year on that assessment, compared to 11% of our students who were full-time Lee Home Connect that took that assessment, who would be 123 students. So to get in that grouping, they would have had.
I see that. I didn't see that other number. Okay.
Yeah, they would, and again, this is not a complete set of students. They would have had to have a prior year score to match with. They would have had to be a school grades component student. They would have had to take the assessment. So and they would have had to be in one of those models in that way.
Okay.
So the numbers can get kind of small when you're looking at it like that.
So that 11% is 11% of
Those
the high school
120.
students that participated in Lee Home Connect. This was their achievement. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Got it.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that because I didn't see that either. Ms. Morgan?
So now I'm curious about science again, because I'm looking at science in the middle school and high school for full-time and Lee Home Connect. Essentially, the outcomes are the same at level 2 and 3. And yet, science has been declining, from the first set of slides. So I'm just wondering, what did we learn about science for those kids using, I would assume, technology that enabled them to hold their own despite the fact that they weren't in face-to-face? So again, I know that's not your area, but just putting the question out there. Thank you.
Good question. Ms. Fisher, did you have anything? Okay. Dr. Kay?
There's one more section then to look at was
Thank you.
advanced courses. So just to kind of take through another aerial perspective on this, we had last year a record high in our participation and diploma achievement for our advanced courses. We had over 15,000 exams administered and 570 IB and ACE diplomas. And one of the reasons I wanted to point that out in particular is because that's a qualifier for the Florida Bright Futures Scholarship. That is 100% tuition to any state university. So that is one of the substantial impacts from a financial perspective for our student body, in particular our 11th and 12th graders. That's a record high for us as well. The achievement trends, our International Baccalaureate recorded an all-time high in percentage achievement, and our Cambridge recorded an all-time high in participation and exams passed. So the next slide shows our percentage exams passed is in the line graph. So for example, you'll see 65% exams passed. That was during the COVID pandemic, so it was an increasing trend. There was a decline given the last school year, but the number of exams and the expansion of those exams increased. So that would include AP, ACE, and IB. And then we have the diploma trends on here as well. On the next slide, Ms. McClung. And these are the two that qualify for Florida Bright Future. So the reason this was put in there was to look at it from, again, a financial impact for students. I know just as a personal side, growing up, this was something I really wanted to achieve because of its impact, and I knew what it could mean from a college perspective. So this is something I think we're all very proud of for what it can mean for students who maybe are first-time college, our first-generation college students, and who are concerned about the impacts of student loan debt. This is a contribution to their future. And then lastly would be our college and career acceleration trend. This is the history of it because it is a relatively new district grade component. And you see we're now, for our second year in a row, over the 60% threshold. And so that is something we're also excited about. And then finally, a program we've been working on over the last 6 months in Lee County is what we're titling our National Development Program. And the purpose of this is to develop a process to support and enrich our students who have already shown academic success, academic achievement. And so we wanted to begin with kind of trying to identify what would be the best possible approach to include students in such a program. And so this fall, we are encouraging as many of our 11th graders as possible to take the PSAT or National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. And so we've been putting our weight behind that and trying to encourage our students to take part in that opportunity this fall, and we'll be communicating with our schools to inform those students about the potential benefits of the PSAT. And then from there going forward, we're going to begin our program development for this National Development Program, where we're going to look at those results and try to identify a cohort of students who might represent a unique level of national success on criteria such as national merit, presidential scholarship, admission to universities throughout the country, et cetera. And so that plan is something we've been working on for the last 6 months. We're excited to kind of identify those students, and it would be hopefully something that over time could even be expanded to have not just a district cohort of students, but also even school-based groupings of students to expand it outward even further. So this is something that we, again, are excited to. We'd like to provide updates as we develop this, and we look forward to sharing more about that soon.
That's great, thank you.
That is my last slide.
There's your last slide.
Well,
Ms. Patrica?
yeah, that is.
Really outstanding job presenting what you had to give to us. I, like my colleagues, am very interested in a school-by-school breakdown, but what you gave us today was really outstanding, and the way you explained it, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Then we will provide that, again, the school-by-school breakdown, but also I did hear, I believe with Ms. Bond, who talked about a little bit about the breakdown of ELL, ESC, maybe some socioeconomics. So I know the team has been looking at some of that, and then if we have that available, we'll try to include all of that as well as the backup material for you.
Yeah, and I think that's good because when I'm listening to everyone up here, they're all stating the same. So that would be great to do that. Thank you, Dr. Spiro and Ms. Gittens.
I have a quick question. Do we have a program, are we working on something where the level 1 and 2 students being given advanced courses? I'm not sure what you call it. I just know that there was a push at one time to not just keep them in remedial, but to offer them a more challenging.
We actually have a variety of different programs that work toward that particular goal. We have AVID, Equal Opportunity Schools. So we have a variety of different initiatives, and we do, I believe we I forget the exact date, but we provided in one of our workshops when it came to the equal opportunity schools adoption, the percent of students who have increased in their participation in our advanced courses. And that was something I know we were very proud of at that time, and we can reshare that information just to give you an idea of how that increase has been distributed. Our attempt is to distribute that equitably and evenly throughout our student population. When we look at when I mentioned earlier, like our expansion and advanced course participation, how we really want to make sure that every student has an opportunity to feel that and be a part of that. But we can certainly share some specific data with you.
Right, and I would really like to see the difference, the comparison in their achievement levels once they were introduced to a higher, intense coursework.
Absolutely. I think that we're all interested to see how what's the cascading effect of that exposure.
Right, okay, thank you.
Right. Is there any other questions? Dr. K, thank you so much. This is really great. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. K. And our executive directors are going to come down and they're going to talk a little bit now about school support and the realities of where we are in our schools, and then a little bit about the impact of their work. And I believe you guys will probably need to bring one extra chair down. Good job, man. I'll stand.
Thank you.
Thank
Is
you.
going to be explaining, they're going to be referring to this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Thank you.
Can I'll have one for,
Can I get one for Ms. Giovanelli?
Yes.
will you have that one for Melissa? Okay. That's everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And I'll let my team introduce themselves, just so we know who's sitting in front of us, and then we'll let them move forward. So, Ms. Fletcher, if you'd like to begin.
Sure. Is my microphone on?
Yes.
All right. I'm Shanna Fletcher, Executive Director for Elementary.
Linda Mayer, Executive Director for Secondary Middle School.
Marcia Burr, Executive Director, Elementary.
And Clayton Simmons, Executive Director for High Schools.
Okay. Welcome.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
To the next one. So I'll start us off. I want to preface this by talking to you all a little bit about the reality that we're currently facing in our schools. I will tell you that it's probably the roughest that I've ever seen, at this point. With, I would say that most of them are in survival mode. They're doing a great job. Our principals and our teachers are working exceptionally hard, along with our support staff and everybody in the building. And it's an all hands on deck approach to, covering classrooms. A lot, we started the year with the grand plan of, we're so excited, we're going to have all these interventions in place, and off we go. We're going to pick up, and bring the kids, get them caught up where we were last year, and try and get them all caught up, and then wham, Delta hit. And so that's where we are right now, and we're making a lot of good plans, and we're making progress, and we're all confident that we're going to get where we need to be. But I don't want to sugarcoat everything and say that it's all great right now, because you all know this too, we're in survival mode. We have a number of support from down here that are going to the schools, and they're covering schools, and then all of the coaches and intervention people, which we traditionally would have available to provide support for our schools, they're covering classrooms. But I want to go over what we actually have down here to support our schools. And I think that there's a misnomer out there that there's an army of staff down here that we can, send out to the schools and that, and have them available at a drop of a hat. But I want to show you exactly what we actually do have that provides support to our schools. And basically, when you look at this chart right here, we're going to start at the top, because by far, we always want to put the most important thing first. And the most important thing for all of us is our 84,000 public school students. So when you look at the top, we're going to go from top down and go from left to right. We have 96 public schools and 5,906 teachers as of the day that we pulled this, which is very recent. Now, let me preface those teachers. It says teachers, it really should say TALC personnel, because you do have some TALC members that are not teachers. So of that 5,906 TALC personnel, we have 626 teachers. That's 11% of our teachers are years 1 and 2 in the profession. And then we have 2,729 elementary school teachers and 3,015 middle school and high school or secondary teachers. So that's currently what we have in our buildings. And then we have 2 different levels or tiers of support down here that we utilize to support our schools. We have professional development, and then we have curriculum and instruction. So when you move down to the second level, when you go to school level, teacher leadership. These are personnel, keep in mind, these are personnel that are stationed in the buildings. So they are currently in positions in the building. And you have 62 PCTs, which are, they're hired by the principals. Back up a second and say that they are vetted down here. They have a vetting process that they go through to make sure they're qualified to teach it. And then there's a hiring pool, and then they're hired out to the schools. But the principals are the ones that hire. And the PCTs, I think we all agree that we want to have an outlet to keep our highly qualified teachers teaching. You know, sometimes, the way that the pay is, you get to a certain point and you either become an administrator or you stay teaching. And we want our good teachers to stay teaching. And part of this is to provide them some financial incentive and some leadership within the building to be able to support the staff. So of those PCTs, you have 62 that were hired by the schools, and they teach 50% of the day, so 50% of the day they're instructing, and then the rest of the day they're providing support to the teachers in the building, coaching. They're also doing helping with the Apples program and working with a lot of the new teachers in the building. So they're providing support to our schools. Our Title I schools are traditionally the ones that have the most need. So they're in there supporting those teachers. Then if you move over to the right one, you have 750 leading and learning teachers. I will tell you, those are full-time teachers that are in our buildings right now. And they are, what is done is they get professional development once a month. We talk to them about teaching strategies through curriculum and instruction. And then they go back and they disseminate the information to the rest of the teachers. So they're kind of like, they get the stuff and we take it back to the school. It's another way that we wanted to put in place to ensure that we had a common message that was going to our buildings. Because sometimes, things, it's like the old telephone game. So that common message is provided to those teachers. They go and support them. Also, I will tell you that our principals and administration get an abbreviated version of it. And then they're tasked to monitor to make sure what is done down here is taking place in the buildings. So those 750 are school-based. And then you move over to the right one more, you have 72 academic coaches. That's at the elementary level. And 392 leading and learning teachers, that's at the secondary level. And then 48 coaches at the high school level, secondary. I want to say that of those 86 coaches, of that total number of the 120, 86 of them are required by the state of Florida. Those are our literacy coaches that are currently in the building. So that's non-negotiable. The state says you have to hire these people. They provide literacy leadership in the building. But I will tell you that I imagine probably all 120 of them are teaching right now to cover vacancies in the classroom. So now let's go down to what we actually house down here to support those 84,000 students and 5,906 teachers. We have 7 LLTs, which they go out to the buildings for 20% of their time and co-teach with a new teacher. And then we have the rest of the day, they're tasked with working with all of the PCTs and providing support to the schools as necessary throughout in the building. Then we have 7 elementary content coaches. These are the content area coaches for elementary, and 9 for secondary. That's 9 total for middle and high school. So everybody, that army of people that we have down here to send out to the schools is actually only 23 people. So that's it, that provides support to the 5,906 teachers in the district. I will also say that, you know, it's not part of this presentation, but we have 4 TALC in ESE that provide ESE support to the schools, and then we have 9 ESOL TALC personnel that provide ESOL support to all of our schools. So that's the support that we have available that we send out to schools, and I also want to clarify what it is that we actually do, and that we have 2 different departments that provide support to schools, and I'm going to explain it on a very, to me it's easy to know this way to look at it. Basically, when you look at it, when you look at professional development, our professional development people, they are the ones that are really giving our teachers the nuts and bolts of instruction. They're teaching them how to be a teacher. Remember, of those new teachers, well, like 206 of them are career changers. They've never been in a classroom. They have no idea what it even, we can't assume that they know how to do a lesson plan or how to do a bell ringer or how to even set up a class and how to make it work for when the kids come in. So that's what we provide to them, is the nuts and bolts of instruction and how to actually be a teacher. And then curriculum instruction, they take care of working with them PLCs, coaching materials, curriculum development and implementation, and doing instructional guides and also exemplars. They're tasked with creating that for the school. So that's the support that we have and how we distribute it amongst the schools.
All right, and I'm going to go in a little bit more detail. Good afternoon. Last year at third quarter, and I apologize, this slide should say FY21. Okay, there we go. Last year at third quarter, we were monitoring the progress monitoring data, and we saw the pretty alarming effects of the missed learning, right, that's happening that Dr. K mentioned earlier. And we knew we couldn't wait until the end of July to take action, take drastic action. So what we did as a proactive measure is we kind of went back into our bag of tricks and thought about how did we get those 23 schools out of differentiated accountability status, because that's really what the missed learning was showing us, is we were going to have schools that are in trouble. And so what we did was we knew we were going to have to give them additional support, and this is what we did. So Tice and Edgewood already have turnaround principles. They were put into place last year. So the leader is the first item that we look at. And then the other supports, I won't read them to you, but you can see them there. This is what we put into place with those 23 differentiated accountability schools to provide additional support to get them out of that status and higher student achievement. Knowing that this was a lot of support, a lot of resources, we felt that we needed to take this action, knowing that they were going to have to fill their classroom teachers first. And like Mr. Simmons said at the beginning, unfortunately, most of them are still covering classrooms right now because of the Delta variant. So we're very hopeful that these supports will be able to be implemented in the original intention very soon. A new support that we added this year that we did not use during the differentiated accountability days is we took 2 assistant principals who were intimately a part of a turnaround situation, and we placed them at 2 schools that we have high concern. And that is Franklin Park and Colonial Elementary. So Jillian Fiore is an assistant principal now at Colonial. She was part of the turnaround with Susan Caputo down in Bonita. And also Abby Lewis, she is now an assistant principal at Franklin Park, who is part of the turnaround at Colonial with Dr. Burr. So they have experienced what that is like and how to make the change, and so they are leading the way at those schools, along with the administrative team. How we determine the support that we provide schools is through our tiering system, and this system has been in place for a few years. We adopted it from the Miami-Dade School District, and basically we use this formula to tier our schools. Tier 1 is the least needy school, and Tier 3 is the most at-need school that needs more support, and it's based on, as you can see, a whole litany of indicators. And to get into even more specific support, we use our TASL 2.0. So the tiers drive the support in TASL 2.0. TASL is our tiered academic system of support for equitable learning. And you can see here that all of our schools receive strategies such as principal leads, constant support for principals and assistant principals. And this summer, school development met with every single school and their principal and admin team and went through Lee County's approach to strategic planning, which Ms. Mayer is going to go over in just a few minutes. And that started our discussion and our very strategic, intentional discussion to put into place this year. Also, we have a tiered content support system that's even more detailed than our original tiered support, if that makes sense. So we get down to per school, per content area, and again, a litany of indicators are used, criteria are used, such as trend data, to determine which content areas need more support. And so by school, each content area is also tiered. We did this because, we had a really good system that got us out of the 23 DA schools to 0, but we realized through trial and error that we really weren't giving attention to our Tier 1 schools. We were giving all of our attention to the Tier 3 DA schools, and we needed a way to really strategically provide support even to our Tier 1 schools. So, for example, there is a school in Cape Coral that is Tier 1 in ELA, but Tier 3 in math. And so we know that we have to push in support to Tier 3. And so when we go and have our strategic conversations, we talk a lot about math. We talk about what are they doing well and, how are they getting such great results in ELA, but what can we do differently in math? And then we're able to provide support. So TASL really helps us get to all schools. And at this point, so Linda's going to get into even more detail regarding the Lee County's approach to strategic planning.
And I'm going to change something about the order just for a second, because I'm going to follow up with what Shannon said and Clayton previously shared about the support we send out to our schools. So it's very important that we have some data behind that. So if we're going to spend the money and we're going to send these people out, what is some of the data? So pulled some of the data on my schools, and 2 of these I'm going to talk about are from the West Zone. And one of the schools is a high-performing school, but had significant steady decline in civics instruction. And so over the last couple of years, we pushed out support to that school, and they went from 44% proficient in civics with our support given to this past year, 62%. So they went from 44 to 50 to 62. So it was a positive. If I showed you on the chart, that Dr. K, I've asked him to pull for me on some of my middle schools, and I gave him specific ones I knew we had pushed a lot of support to. So that was Matt K's, one of his schools he pushed civic supports to. Another one of our schools in the West Zone, my highest performing school, actually, besides Sanibel this year, overall on the FSA scores, was having a lot of issues with their ELA gains and their moving students, even though they had high proficiency numbers. The movement of students for all students was not moving at the rate we wanted. It was a downward decline from 64, 61, 57, and it had just been a constant drop. This past year, our scores are at 59% at that school. And again, Rebecca Savage went out and worked with that school and said, what can you do? You've got these high-performing students, a lot of level 3s to 5s, what can you do? Just a few tweaks, and they made that gains. Their L2-5s, their bottom students, had gone constantly from 52 to 49 to 38, and this past year, 44%. So it was just those little tweaks. Had one school in the East Zone proficiency. It's a straight upward trend since we've been working with that school on ELA proficiencies as well. So we're glad to just letting you know that those structures we put in place are working. One more piece of data that I'm going to go ahead and bring out and share was that I break down the middle schools, and it's charted. Middle schools by where are we at? And some of you asked the question, is there a difference between students in maybe the East Zone or an area where they don't have quite as much, they're not as already proficient as other schools? And yes, that was the biggest hit. So if you look at our numbers of proficient students, level 3 to 5, and holding them, they were the group that took the biggest hit. My 5 schools that are tiered for extra support this year went backwards. They lost their gains. They lost proficiency. And again, most of them were sitting at level 3. So when you're pulling 3 to 5s, some of the other schools have a lot of 4 to 5s. In my last school I was at, I had 5 students that were level 5s. I had a few level 4s. The majority of my students are sitting at level 3. And so they easily can slip back. So there takes extra support. So we appreciate the district for funding them, and Shannon knowing that process and how it had been tiered, and that we were pretty accurate with our predictions prior to the scores that were coming in based on IRADI data. So we were really pleased with that, but I have it broken down, and I'm sure they do as well. But just to let you know that it's exactly like what you predicted. The higher the number of those 3s that are sitting there versus the 4s and 5s, they slip backwards and we lost proficiency. So, and that hurt us. So in front of you, you have a folder, and it's called The Amazing Race. And in that Amazing Race folder on July the 29th, we met here as a district, and we had different rotations where the principals, leadership teams, not just principals, APs, they brought other people down with them. And so we went through this, and they had a great day of learning and engaging with us on all of the ABCs and Ds. We added D this year, and D is for dropout prevention. And we finally, as a group, we started talking about this is not, we can't wait till high school to worry about them dropping out. The data is showing if we have high absentee rates in elementary and middle school, it's going to have a negative impact. If they've been retained twice, their likelihood of graduation is very low. So we started looking at what can we do as an entire system to ensure that we help them graduate. So that's our goal. So we started off with that as our focus, so we added the D. And the ABCs take care of the D, if we do those really well. So in your folder also, I typed out, I shared one of my schools, Lee County's approach to strategic planning. You've heard about strategic planning. We went out over the summer and we met with our principals, each of us, and we all had the exact same format, so we're doing everything in alignment. The little tweaks that we did was I added civics for mine, and high school might have added biology to his, and so there's a little bit of change. But this is one of our strategic plan, and I took the very first one alphabetically and just printed it out for you to see. So we started looking at attendance and said we just can't look at just the children, the negative impact this past year of students. Oh, I'm sorry, if you go to the very back of your folder, it's a stapled handout. Let me hold it up. Sorry. Very, very back of your folder, and it's a stapled handout at the back. I apologize. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So if you'll look at that one, we started off with attendance and teacher attendance and teachers late to work. How are we addressing that? Because that impacts the teacher that always gets there on time, that always comes to work, because they're the ones you're having to cover class. So we talked to each school about what are you doing about that? How are you going to mitigate that happening in the future as we move forward? So this is one principal and what she does for incentives if they're they haven't missed a day of work. So she gives them free shirts, jean passes, whatever it takes to motivate, free ice cream party even for the teachers. They like that. Some of them like just veggies, they said, that have a veggie tray and ice cream. But preschool, they had a whole training at this school, and a lot of the schools did, on the importance. How does this negatively, because teachers are in the business because they love teaching children. It's not their salary, it's because they truly have a love for students, or it should be always for all of us. And so these, they really looked at what happens when I'm absent, because nobody's going to replace you in that classroom, the same. And so what are we going to do to ensure that they have a quality teacher in that classroom every single day? So the teachers talked about that at this school. There were 2 other schools that did the same article, and they went through the article and the negative impact that had, so it was really powerful. Then we talked about students and what are their next steps there. So some of them said, okay, I'm going to call out. We're going to build relationships. Almost all of the middle schools, and I know a lot of the elementary and high schools did similar thing, but we did a lot of team building that first week to give them a partner to be with, somebody, accountability almost as a student level. So we did a lot with our student attendance and making sure they were coming to school, because it's hard to teach them if they're not there, so we want them there as much as we can get them there. This principal, it's new on her, she said, she made a makeup work section added to her weekly lesson plan, so it's also in her Google Classroom. It changes, so every week, and they're checking it to making sure it's being done. What are you doing? How do the parents know how to make up their work? So they're very strategic with this. Any of these things that are links, and I'll be glad to share this, I asked the principal, and she'd be glad for me to share this with you guys, but they're links. One of the positives about these forms, before I came down here, Mrs. Fletcher and her team had already developed a fiscal year 22 school document folder. And I always liked it as a principal out in the building, because I not long ago was there, because I could go in and I could look at Marcia's and say, what did Marcia write in her plan? How wonderful is she? Because she's amazing, and I could kind of steal those things, right? So that's what our principals can see as well. So they're going in, and if they see a document, all of this is open for them, so they can steal best practices, borrow best practices from each other, and they're doing that. And they're saying, hey, can you tweak this? Can you do this? Can you send it to me and not in a PDF if it's in a PDF? So they're working on that. So attendance was our first one. Let's get them there. Let's motivate our students. The next one was our social emotional well-being of the students. So there's a flyer also in your packet. And so this was given to them at that July 29th. It looks like a triangle. It's in your packet, and on the back it has some opportunities for them. So all of the schools got this, and they had a whole presentation on taking care of the social and emotional well-being of students. And we've seen with some of the behaviors, or I have at middle school in the paper, as you've seen, some of you, there's some concerns about they're lashing out, they're frustrated, their students are going through a lot. And so the wraparound services, we're making sure they're there for them. And so we're looking at that and trying to establish those positive relationships with those students. And how do you do that? Sometimes it's scheduling with the right teacher. That teacher that meets them in the morning with that positive outlook and love. So we talk about that when I went out, and we all went out to our buildings. We talked about, who do you schedule with first thing in the morning? What about that kid who doesn't get to school on time and he's always missing those core classes? Maybe his elective should be first thing in the morning, so if he's going to miss something, he's going to miss that PE class, he's going to miss that art class. Not that we want him to, but it might be a motivator for him to get there on time. So they were all very strategic in how they plan their master schedule. Mental health and well-being, I know I'm running over. And the next one was classroom success. We really looked at how are we going to, PLCs, you've heard about PLCs for years, professional learning communities. And so at the district this year, we have a different format to that, because we had an article we read with them. We did a closed read on the article, and it was almost like we were missing a piece. We had, what do you kids need to know? How are you going to know that they know, that they got it? That third piece was, what are you going to do if they don't? And the last one was, what are you going to do if they do? So we combined 3 and 4. And step 3 is now the how. How are you going to teach it to them? How is it that Marcia learns different than how Linda learns? I'm a visual, I have to see. Marcia might be auditory. What are you doing to take those things into consideration? How am I talking with Ms. Gittens about, we're both teaching math, what are you doing, Ms. Mayer? You're making great gains in math on two-step equations, and my kids are not. So what are you doing? So she comes and observes me, or I observe her on the next, she's doing fractions great and I'm not, so I observe her. So we're having those open dialogues, and we're looking at, how do you instruct? How does the instruction take place? And that's having a very positive impact, or it will once we get fully into each other's classrooms like we want to. I think I talked a little bit about placement of students with the needs. You know, this one, it's on the yellow page where it says classroom success, about midway down. How do you strategically place them with the teacher based on attendance, behavior, and classroom success? And again, it's that morning when you come in and that teacher who's so cheery and bright eyes and ready to go, and, you know, I'm a morning person, so that might have been me, but it might not be somebody else, you know. But later in the day, I'm kind of, you know, get ready for a nap almost in the afternoon, but that other teacher, Marcia, might be on fire. And so you just have to look at the kids and truly look at your individual students that need that extra support. So we're doing that. We have school calendars of our PD. So another thing is professional development. In the past, we've done PD and we do it and it's done. And so we've really talked as a group about professional development should be ongoing. So you have that PD and you'll learn a new strategy, a new skill. How's that continuing? So they had to plan out their PD for the year. What are you doing professionally to develop them? And then how are you maintaining it? So what are you doing with the next steps? So this is all part of our plan. And our last one is D, dropout prevention, and that ties in the attendance. It ties in the behavior, you know, and one of the things we talked about with every one of my meetings, and I know they did as well, what are you going to do about little Susie over here who disrupts the class for the others who want to learn? What are we going to do? So we put some things in place to help Susie at each school. What are you going to do to help her so the other students continue to learn? Because we want all students to learn, Susie included, but what are we going to do to help her? And so we really talked about that and spent time. They analyzed it, who was out of the class a lot with referrals, whatever, and what are we going to do to support that child and the other children that are trying to learn. So that was ours on our strategic planning. That took me a while. Sorry. Monitoring through executive director school partnership. So we go out and we go and partner with them. We're there to coach them. That's one thing, but also accountability. You know, what is your data saying? I've spent the last few weeks, as well as they, like my partners here, we've spent the last few weeks looking at schedules. And are the students properly scheduled? Are they in the intensive class they need to be in? Are they being pushed? Are they in the rigorous courses they need to be in? Somebody asked about that. Yes. Are they being challenged? I know as a turnaround principal, and Marcia and I both agree on this, that you have to provide that rigor there. They have to be exposed to grade level standards. You have to push them. So I taught at this level and told my teachers, you're going to teach here, and that's going to pull everybody up. And then we're going to have interventions in place. And we do. We have that across the board at all of our levels now. We have interventions. Now some of our teachers are being pulled, and they're teaching. And so that it's not quite like we want it to be, but we're going to get there. As soon as we get this Delta variant under control a little bit, we're going to get there. That's our passion. We are in schools 4 days of the week. That doesn't mean it's the whole day, but I try to visit 2 is my goal. And some days I get 3. If I go by a school and they're like, no, they're testing today, you can't walk. And so far I've walked reading and language arts. That's been my goal this far, because our emphasis, I know elementaries is math and literacy is their focus, and that's what they're focused on this year, and making learning gains. Mm-hmm. And then mine is also math and literacy being number 1 and math number 2. And you saw in the middle school that we were down in that red quadrant. I know. I saw it too. My heart hurt a little bit. And the reason we dropped there, if you look, we were above the state average. So when we dropped below it, that's why we dropped there. We were above it by 2 points. So if you go back to his slide, you'll see that. And so then when we drop, that makes it look like a negative. But we had been trending towards being above the state average. And so that hurt my heart a little bit. And then in the ELA, I looked at the data, and it's our 7th grade. They were way off the mark in proficiency. And we're working on that as well, making sure we have the right teachers with the 7th grade students. Our data chats, so usually they come down to us and they meet and they bring their exemplars and the assessments they've been given, whether they're obtrusive assessments or non-obtrusive assessments. That's very powerful, and what I mean by that is you can walk a classroom and you can tell immediately whether students are getting the information or they're not. I walked a room the other day in an ESOL classroom, and it was a first-year teacher, so I'm not blaming her, but there was a student in there, and I said, this student's getting 100% on every one of his Systems 44 assessments. And I said, he's not properly placed. And she said, but he doesn't speak English. I said, he doesn't speak English, but he has full mastery of his language, and he understands, and he's able to translate this and get help. And as soon as somebody helps him, he had 100%, and it was on 2 assessments I watched. So she goes, oh, I didn't realize that he could be moved somewhere else. I said, sure, we'll support him in another way. But getting out there, and our coaches are doing that. Again, they're not in the classrooms as much as they need to be because they're covering classes, but we'll get them where they need to be. And our last thing is connect with Lee, and all of us have been blessed to get to work that the last couple of weeks. I asked for elementary even though it's middle, because it's been a while since I've been in the classroom teaching. So I taught ELA, and we've all taught different subjects, and Mr. Simmons was doing social studies at the high school, but we're on there for students that feel like they need a little extra support during the day. Maybe they're home quarantined or whatever, so we've made that available to them. So, Shanna, you want to take the next page? Sure.
And before they go to the next slide, when they talked about doing those instructional strategic plans with every single school, they did that with the school leadership team. The executive director and our content coordinators were there as well. And they literally go teacher by teacher by teacher. And that one of the things they also talk about by teacher is how many years has this teacher been teaching, what kind of support do they need as well. So not only talking about the needs of the kids, simultaneously, we're talking about what are the needs of the teachers, and then what is it that we need to do to be able to provide push and support for them. So it was a lot of time, but one of the most powerful pieces we did before the school year ever even began, because we needed to make sure that we truly had the kids where they needed to be as one of our initial mitigation strategies. Shannon.
Actually, I'm gonna take it. As you know, I'm just recently in this position, so they basically had their presentation plan before I came on board. But we thought we could add just a little bit because I was in the seat of the differentiated accountability turnaround. I was at a turnaround school, and I was working with them with the strategies put in place by the school development team at that time. And I just wanted to speak to how supportive and how effective those strategies are. And what we found out, those of us that were in the turnaround at that time, is that these are good strategies for every school. You don't have to be a school that is at risk, or as I like to say, at potential. Larry Bell is a mentor of mine, and he's getting school districts across the country to change the term from at-risk schools to at potential schools, because it really is that. It's potential to really make significant gains with populations that are just need some more support. So I'm just sharing from the personal standpoint of how supportive it was and how it forces you to really look at all of the pieces of your school and how they all fit together and how they support all students, not just the ones that are at potential, but the ones that are high performing as well. And so with this on the back of your folder is the kind of basically a mantra, if you will, or a motto, but educating the whole child involves classroom success systems, behavior systems, attendance systems, and dropout prevention systems, and having that systematic plan that Ms. Mayer talked about just gives all schools a laser-like focus on what they need to do within their buildings to be successful, and it helps us as supporters of those schools to also develop that laser-like focus of what each school needs individually to become the very best that they can be.
I think we're done.
Well, I'm going to see if there's anybody that has questions, but I have to say this was excellent, and I really appreciate it. And I was wondering, Ms. Mayer, if you were going to breathe, because that was good. You did that all in one breath. I was impressed by that one.
If I can add, so the folders really are our systems, all in one place. So the principals have clear communication of these systems and what is expected of them. And then the strategic plan that occurred this summer is also going to occur each quarter. So we're getting ready to send out now the content strategic plans that the principals and administrators will work through with their teachers in their PLCs to really get down to the student level and also the standard level. And then what are they going to do with the, like go through the PLC questions and in detail student by student. So not only are we going tiering school by school, content by content, We're also getting to the student level, individual student level by content and standards as well through using our exemplars. So I just wanted to make sure you all saw that connection.
Thank you. I think, Ms. Morgan, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I just want to say that was a fabulous presentation. Thank you. I understand so much more than I did before, and I really appreciate the level at which you are operating, the student level, the school level, the differentiation within the school. I think that's awesome. So I was very impressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Vaughn, please. Thank you, Ms. Morgan.
Yeah, I'm going to take a different tactic with it because our backgrounds, Ms. Morgan and I, we have very, very different backgrounds. And so I was nodding with a lot like, oh, for a teacher that's taught, let's say, 10 years or more, a lot of this is common sense. So this is what I'm hearing that to me, and I'm taking a teacher's point of view on this, doesn't mesh in what you're saying and what you're doing. I heard a lot of, we send support out. We have them come in monthly and we tell them, we give the professional development and so on and so forth. What I'm hearing is, on one hand, we want to have avenues for teachers who want to advance in their profession, in their craft. We want to give them something else, something additional. I'm not seeing the professional respect that seasoned teachers deserve. For it, I would summarize it, I'm hearing a lot of top-down. I'm interested in the horizontal. I know that teachers, and what I'm not saying that what you're doing isn't important, and what you're saying is something that new teachers need to hear, and that people who haven't made a career in education need to hear. But what are we doing on a horizontal level? For instance, do we make use of, besides the little documents that are out there, I know all about that, but professional learning communities that, for instance, okay, as an ELA teacher in high school, maybe I'm for the first time teaching Beowulf, and oh my God, my kids are, and so there are only a couple other teachers in my school, let's say, that are senior teachers, but there are teachers at 14 other high schools that teach this. Back in ancient days, and I don't even know what this stuff's called anymore, for AP teachers, it was a listserv where we had actually people all over the country that we could get wonderful best practices and ideas and all of that. Do we have anything like that where teachers can actually log on, not search through a bunch of documents, but log on and have their questions answered by other teachers in this district and best practices? And the other thing I'm going to say, and I'm just going to say it, a lot of our principals taught for all of 3 or 4 years, and then they became APs, and then they became principals. And the focus, and rightly so, is on leadership and management. Not saying that the principals don't become experts in curriculums, but how is that possible? How can a principal be an expert in every single curriculum, especially if he or she has been a principal for a really long time, hasn't been in the classroom for a while? That is not the skill set that the principals should be bringing. So I ask you, shouldn't we have more emphasis, if we're really respecting our teachers, on the horizontal as well as the vertical top-down, here's what you need to learn, this is what this week's professional development is going to be, because we have so many, the first and second year teachers, they need professional development and
Yes, ma'am.
just
If you're-
management and all.
If you
And
look
I
at
know,
the top of,
okay, but what about that horizontal thing
right, and it
first?
says, how are you tiering your PD for teachers throughout the year? Because I know myself, and I was in the classroom for 20 years. So I know myself that there are teachers that need different levels of professional development. So we asked them that question. So there is tiered PD happening in our schools now. So I'm proud to say that they're really looking at it and saying, what does Betsy Vaughn need versus Linda Mayer, who's never taught language arts, okay? So has math. So I would need something totally different if I went past a test, so I could pass it, right? But I would need a lot of support, okay? So I agree with you 100%. So we're looking at tiered systems of support and professional development.
Well,
What
yeah,
do we
because
need?
when I was teaching, I needed more of the technical stuff, like extra on some of the technology, whereas the younger people just needed basic. But let me go back to that horizontal support. And I'm not talking about teacher leaders or the peer teachers and all of that. I'm talking about the teacher in the classroom. Most of our teachers, what can they do besides search through documents that are in the shared, I don't even remember what it's called because I haven't looked at it in a long time. How can they reach out and find out, I'm teaching at Estero, I want to know how they're teaching Beowulf at Dunbar.
Okay. Well, we do have a couple of pieces set up in place to kind of help with that, but you're right. It's always good the more connections you can make across other schools and other districts and things like that, the better off you are. But a couple of things that the curriculum department has put into place have been shared drives.
Right.
And shared Google Classrooms with teachers that teach the same thing, so they can get on and they can ask questions of one another and share great ideas and strategies and techniques. So it's on the radar, and we're working to doing it and putting something out that also sometimes takes a little bit of time for the teachers to make the best use of it as they develop their expertise with it and their ability, their connections across the district and across shared content. So we expect it to continue to get better, but it is definitely something that we're working on.
Okay, and I'm just putting it out there that to me, as a teacher, no matter if you're a first-year teacher or a teacher who's taught for 20 years, but you have a new, you have new curriculum you're teaching. I just personally have a problem with hearing so much top-down and not enough horizontal, and seeing leadership developed in that way. And because these are teachers that are going to be teaching 100% of the time, and these are teachers that are they want to stay teachers, right, and they have something to share, right, and yet they don't get to share.
We also have our leading and learning teams, and they consist of teachers from every school across the district, and they do talk about by content area and grade, the different best practices and things. So that is a really great horizontal practice that we do have in place.
And I understand all of that, the shared and all of that, but I still think we're missing the boat with not being able to, like, if Saturday night I'm working out something specific and I'm like, I'm just so frustrated with this. Oh, wait. And you can just go online and find people across the district that teach the same things.
It's powerful. We'll look into that.
And I think that was the intent of the shared Google Drives. I want to back up and talk a little bit about the leadership. And I full on agree that a high school principal, I can tell you when I first got to Estero, I didn't know the content. I didn't. But I do think, what I do think is that the principal has to be the academic leader of the building. And we have to give them the tools that they need to be the academic leader of the building. I'm not going to be an expert in calculus, but am I able to go into a classroom and identify what good instruction looks like? Am I going to be able to support my teachers in the way that they need and give them the support that they need? So there's a lot of tools that you can give principals. And, you know, I think across the board, you know, the focus is that we do have principals and we do want them to be the academic leaders of the building, because they need to put that first, because that is what is most important. So, you know, everything that we do, or everything that we try to put in place with as far as leadership, is to try and make them servant leaders. You know, that they lead with their heart and that they care about their staff and they care about each other. So, you know, that's a big focus, and we're going to have another big focus on this coming up at our next, our first lead meeting of the year. And part of that is leading from the heart and being a servant leader. And I think that that's important, and that we revisit that. And we constantly talk about, you know, taking care of yourselves, but you need to take care of your staff and your teachers. You need to take things off of their plates that are not important right now, and you need to look out for their social and emotional health. So that is a big focus, and that continues to be, you know, a focus that we're going to continue to work on, is to make sure that our principals have everything that they need to be a successful academic leader of the building, but also that they're a servant leader and support their staff. And ultimately, that needs to go down to the students, because the students have to be first.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Patrica and then Ms. Gittens.
So slide 42 was particularly helpful to me, because we hear about PCTs and leading and learning classroom teachers, and the numbers sound alarming, and then when you see it on a page like this, you're like, oh, all right, well, that makes sense, and now I have context. And I'm super happy that we have an opportunity for teachers to continue to teach instead of going into admin. Is that common across the state, or is that unique to Lee County?
It's unique. It was originated with the TIF grant, the Teacher Incentive Fund grant, that began in 2012. And so then it just morphed, and that was one of the pieces from the TIF grant that we sustained through the budget process. Title I schools have access to PCTs at this time.
Fantastic. And so much of this and what you showed us today is attendance, which is nearly impossible right now. Just anecdotally, I was at one of my kids' extracurricular things this weekend, and I saw a teacher who I love. She had one of my kids in elementary, and I asked, what can I do to help you? And she said, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing admin can do. She said, I'm teaching kids who, she's high school now, teaching kids who haven't passed the test yet. I have 36 kids in my class, and on any given day, 14 are in the class. You can't teach kids that are not in the building. And so I understand that you can have the best programs in place and the best executive directors at every level, and if the kids aren't in school to learn, the kids aren't in school to learn. So the challenges you're facing are huge. I really, really appreciate what you're doing to support the people in the schools. Thank you.
Dr. Spiro, you wanted to answer?
And that's why throughout this entire presentation, the team has continued to say, however, these individuals are in classes teaching, because we know when they said survival mode, that is where we are.
Yep.
Our number one job is to make sure that adults who are certified, that are with children, so that our kids first have certified teachers in front of them. So yes, similar to last year, we had all of these interventions, these enrichments, but we were unable to fully achieve them. At this point, we have not been able to fully achieve the systems that we wanted to put in place right now, because we are still exactly where you talked about. Attendance is a big issue, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow. I think I send that in the weekly update. Every week you get to see the student attendance. Yes, that's a grave concern as well.
What I think the most impactful thing that she said to me was, she said, I feel like a failure as a teacher, because she's unable to, and that, I mean, this teacher is one of the best that my kids have had in all the time we've been in Lee County, and that's how she feels. And it's hard to go into work every day, you know, when you're so good at what you do. And she said, I'm looking for other jobs, which I think is kind of, that's what you do when you're unhappy at work. You look at other things and you fantasize a little bit about what would it be like doing something else. I don't think she's going to leave, but it's just, I think it speaks to the challenges that they have right now. And we've talked here a lot about teachers, but we rarely recognize the fact that the people in the lunchrooms are doing double duty, and the people who are driving buses are doing double duty, and the custodians in the schools are doing double duty, because it's not just teachers that are absent, it's not just students that are absent, it's all staff that's absent. So just the challenges for our staff this year, I think in many ways are worse than they were last year, because of the exhaustion from last year on top of this year. It's just, the challenges are huge, and I appreciate you sticking with it and doing what you can to get out there and support. Thank you.
Ms. Fisher, I'm going to go to Ms. Gittens, and then I'll come right back to you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you, guys. I listen to you each when you do your part, and it's like, oh, I get a chance to tell them all the stuff we're doing. And you did a wonderful job. You can tell that you're filled with your topic. A couple of questions. One, and what Mr. Clayton was just saying about the principals or academic leaders in the building. There used to be at one point, in order to be a principal, you had to have experienced and worked in AP and APC. And it's my understanding that's not necessarily the case at this point. There are some principals that do not have both sides of the house. And I'm not naming names or pointing out anybody, but overall, I think that that is a detriment because of what you said, that the principals have to be the academic leaders. And I feel the schools that are most successful have the principals that do know and have experienced and can work through an academic situation. And, unlike other jobs, let's say, where you can be a leader of a department and you surround yourself with people that have that knowledge, in this particular situation, I don't think that's okay. I really feel that that person at the leading position of a school needs to have had hands-on and worked through a schedule. I never will forget one APC that I thought was one of the best in the district, now as a principal, but I watched that person work through that schedule and shift things around with like some of the questions that you asked in here. That to me is so imperative. You can't sit back and say, okay, well, that's your job as APC. No, it's my job as principal to be able to guide you and to see a pothole that you may be taking us into. So I just wanted to say that. I am very visual. I don't know if anybody else is as visual as I am. But thinking back when I was a teacher, it would be so helpful to be able to see almost an org chart type thing, that I'm coming in as a teacher, and if I'm the type that wants to see where I can be in 10 years, showing me I could be a team leader, I could be a this, and what dollar amount goes with that. If I wanted to move here, but I don't want all the responsibility of coming and being at the district office, how can I be a coach? And what is it going to do to my salary? How is it going to help me? Almost a separate org chart for teachers with the salaries and the responsibility going along with it. Because then I can, as a teacher, decide, that $10,000 a year sounds good, but I don't want that kind of responsibility. So it would give them choices. It would show them exactly. And it would also help in the perception that we are more nepotistic, to say it nicely. It would give people an opportunity coming in to plot out what they do. I was sitting here thinking of an example. If you go to college to become an engineer because you want to build things, and you get a job with a company and you're building and doing all this wonderful stuff, and they say to you, but if you're going to really be successful, you need to be a supervisor. Well, does a supervisor build? No, the supervisor tells everybody else how to build. Well, I don't know if I want to do that. So how can I stay building things and still move up? Does that make sense to anybody?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that was one thing I wanted to bring up. And I recall, I don't know when it was, hearing that we had a lot more than 23 coaches. So I don't know if we got the information incorrectly, but I was told at one point we had more than that. But
We wish we
okay.
did.
And thank you for that.
It would be nice to.
No,
No, I think sometimes there's that they don't understand that the ones that are school-based, they're supporting the school. I mean, and there is more, but they're full-time in the school supporting their schools.
In the specific school.
Yes,
But
ma'am.
that's why this is so good, because you can explain, no, we don't have, 200 people sitting down here waiting for their call to go out like an Uber. They're already at schools. So that information is the type of thing that people need to hear, that we need to hear. So thank you for that. 2 more quickies. On this, this is the strategic plan overall, correct? Or is this just for middle schools, or just for?
All 3 levels.
For all 3 levels. So can I say that the questions in, like looking at classroom success, the questions in black are the ones that are generic to the strategic plan that you would ask anyone at any school?
Correct. And her answers are in blue.
Is the result for that specific school?
Yes, ma'am. And so each school is completely differentiated in what their needs are. Because an East End school or West End might have different needs.
Right.
So the questions are generic, but then they answer it individually.
Based on their particular
Based on
needs?
their particular population.
One that really tweaked my interest was the placement of students question. How have you strategically placed students with teachers based on their attendance, data, behavior, and all that? Very, very important, but how do we do that? In other words, are you selecting teachers that have certain characteristics, that their kids usually are at school? How do you deal with that particular question?
I can answer that one. I think what we wanted to ensure is that, we didn't want, a lot of times teachers may not want to teach the low-level kids, or they may not want to, but every kid in all of our buildings deserves to have the best teacher in front of them.
Right.
And it's a principal's job to look at it. You may have to, unfortunately, take somebody out of their comfort zone, but if you word it correctly and say this, we have complete confidence in you that you're going to be able to do this, and these kids need that best teacher in front of them. Right. We just wanted to ensure that we were giving quality instructors to all of our kids and not just groups of our kids. So that was a big conversation that we had to have. Now, obviously we have the teachers that we have, and we have a shortage. So, sometimes that may mean, having them teach 7 out of 8, just to make sure we have a quality teacher in front of them. Or if there's an open position, if you can fill it with some of your good staff and compensate them for teaching an extra period, that's one way to do it. That's what that statement meant. We just want to ensure that they're putting a lot of thought into who's teaching in front of the kids, because we want all of our kids to have a quality teacher. And
I totally agree with that. I guess the question that comes to mind with that one is, how as a principal do you know someone doesn't want to teach the lower levels? I mean, do they just say to you,
no, it may not be that.
Classes and don't
not.
give
I don't
me
think
this?
it's that. It's that maybe they haven't had that opportunity they may have always taught an upper level class. It's not that they don't want to. It may be out of their comfort zone.
Right.
So, but they're still, if you know a good quality teacher, you can work to put them in the position that's going to benefit all of their kids.
And that's a fine line, though, because if you really want to retain all of your teachers, you want to keep everybody happy.
Right.
And if Miss Susie says, well, I'll stay, but I don't want any level ones.
I always surveyed my teachers, and I'm sure they did as well, but I always surveyed my teachers that what do you want to teach next year?
Right.
Put it in your preference of a wish list, kind of. What do you want to teach? And so they would tell me, because I would put ESE on one team and ESOL on the other team, and that way I divided up my pairs and support for those, for the teams. And so you would ask them, what do you want to teach, and who do you feel comfortable? What do you want to stretch yourself? And I would
Right.
ask them that. How do you
Okay.
want to stretch yourself this year as a professional and grow? And sometimes they might say, well, I've always taught the low students. I'd like one advanced class. I'd like to try it. I had a teacher, I can remember to this day, that she said, I want to try the advanced. She
Okay.
came to me into the first quarter and said, is there any way you can change my schedule? This is not for me. And it was a big deal. She came to
You're
me and she said, it's not for me. And she's a department head there now, but she still teaches all, she calls them her low babies, because she
Right.
says, I move them. And she
Right.
does. She has like a 60-something% of her kids
Very
she
good.
connects with, and she moves them.
Moves
So
them
you
up.
want them to feel part of the decision is really important, and they are part of that decision. And so that's what I would always do. And I would talk to them about, what do you, I know a teacher, let's say it's Gwen, and I know if somebody doesn't show up for your class, I know you're going to make that personal phone call.
Right.
You're going to reach out to them and say, hey, where are we at today? I didn't see you in class, I missed you, missed my high five, I missed my elbow bump, whatever. And you're going to reach out. So you try to look at those teachers and tell them ahead of time, I appreciate you.
This is what you're doing.
You make those connections.
And this is where the relationship relevance and rigor comes in. But one last thing, academic coaches let's just ask this, do all of the coaches at whatever level of coaching they are get some type of a stipend? Because I understand there are academic coaches that do not. So if we did it on a organizational chart level, then maybe it would mean if you're this type of coach, you get, $20 or whatever, and this one gets $50 and this one gets whatever, but on a tiered basis, so that at least financially in some little way, we're saying we appreciate the extra that you're doing in helping someone else to achieve.
It's a supplemental contract that they get, and it also fills their career bucket. There's career ladder bucket to move up the ladder because they've gotten that supplemental, so it's part of that process.
Okay. And I think this is wonderful, and so is all of it, and thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Ms. Gittens. Ms. Fisher.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much for that presentation. So when Clayton started out and said, I want to talk about the reality of where we are, and that is in survival mode, I was writing down questions as you guys were speaking. And before the presentation was finished, my questions basically were answered. And if I was looking for anything else in addition to the information that you provided, which was extremely comprehensive, and I've seen this before, and it's amazing. I mean, this is really good. But for the listening audience, and for some of our people who don't know the acronyms and all that, I was wondering if there's a way sometimes of including some specific examples of like a strategy, or like what does that look like when we have an academic coach? What are they doing? Like just like a specific example to show those people who may not understand the educational lingo. Other than that, I liked a lot of the things that you said, and Linda, with, having the teacher be part of the decision-making is extremely important. I know a lot of our teachers are feeling stressed and overwhelmed, and I think that in order to help them to stay, we need to use those kinds of techniques and strategies in communicating with them. And I also like the idea that when you meet with your people, you're having a back and forth conversation, so that you may be telling them, this is what we need to have done. And many of the teachers, even the less experienced and some of the career changers, can offer suggestions and ideas that may be a little bit creative or a little bit, out of the gate. And so I think in this day and age, we need that. And I really appreciate this, because it's all about what we are doing to support our students. And I know the big challenge right now is to get them in front of us. So thank you very much for an amazing presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Patricia, you said you have one more?
Yeah, just one of the things, I've talked about this before at the table, is I've got one of my kids now is in a career and technical program at his high school, and built into those classes are daily assessment of soft skills. Does he show up on time? Is he dressed appropriately? Is he on task? Is his phone away? All of that. And it's the first time I've seen that in any of my kids' classes. I'm wondering why are we reserving that, if we are, just for career and tech classes instead of it being built into all of our classes? Because I'm not just hearing from the construction industry that kids aren't showing up on time. I'm hearing from all industries that these soft skills are lacking. And as a parent, I do my best to get my kids places on time. But to a certain extent, I have to rely on their employer to dock them pay if they're late, or their teacher to not mark them down if they're late or something. Like, they don't listen to me, and they will listen to you. So I'm just throwing that out there. That's the first thing. The second thing is, before they're done, you should be very proud of yourself, because you're in charge here.
Well, I'm very proud of my team.
This is really good.
Very proud of my team. So I've got an amazing group of individuals that work with me on a daily basis. This is a small part of a larger team behind us as well, and so I feel very fortunate every single day, to be honest with you. Let me talk to you a little bit about the soft skills. So we've heard a lot over the last 3 years about soft skills, and so that really began with this conversation from this table back with Rita Davis and her team to talk about how can we start embedding these soft skills into our courses as well. So that's why you're starting to see that piece. And yes, obviously there needs to be a deepening of that and outside of those courses, but this is just the phase approach on how we can begin that process.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Gittens has one small question.
I have one small, okay. I've heard you talk a lot about career changers, and what struck me in that conversation is we're always looking at the career changer coming in and what we teach them about what to do. And I hope that we also keep in mind what we can listen and learn from them coming from where these kids are going out into. And not so much just, the teaching skills, but listening to some of the things that they do. And it probably will help encompassing the soft and harder skills as they're teaching these courses. So kind of, I guess, giving them a little bit more kudos for coming in knowing something, not just knowing nothing about education.
Good point.
Thank you. And again, I just want to thank you all very much. This was great. And I did have the opportunity to come in and witness this amazing race and sat in on multiple classes, and people were communicating with one another and learning from each other. So I thought that was really great, and just thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You have a question, Ms. Fisher.
Oh, Ms. Fisher, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to say
don't leave.
that, as we look at educating the whole child, and I've heard Chuck Bradley say many times, ready, responsible, reliable, respectful role model. So I think that we are from early childhood on, incorporating those soft skills in there. And I think over the past years, when we've had a lot of emphasis on and time taken with testing, that maybe we didn't, but I think recently with restorative practices and those kinds of things, I think we really are embedding that in our everyday education right from the beginning. So I feel confident about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Okay, so moving right along, the next is good of the order. Ms. Fisher, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind.
Okay, I don't think I have anything for the good of the order today. Thank you.
Ms. Pacheca?
No, thank you.
Ms. Gittens?
Guess what? No. I wanted to keep you on
Document
your
the date,
toes.
please. Date
Nothing right
is-
now, thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Vaughn?
No, thank you.
And Ms. Morgan?
So, and by the way, Attorney Dupree Bruno, did you get a chance to look at policy 5.021 and determine that that was in fact salary N? So here's the thing. I'm a little concerned about how some of the appointments have been taking place. And I looked at other districts, the bigger districts, to see how it is that they structure their recruiting, hiring, how they do their salaries, et cetera. Because let me be honest, I got the email from Dr. Savage about the change in compensation. And what I read was that he was leveling compensation across levels as opposed to direction that the board had given the previous superintendent to establish market rates for jobs, particularly outside the education field, that were where you could provide market-based data showing what the salary should be, and then adjust it for local economic factors. So that was my understanding about where we were, but I got the distinct impression that the current superintendent is moving in a different direction. So I think we need to have a policy that talks about if we're going to direct the superintendent to do market-based, then maybe it needs to be in policy, because that's the only way we can control it. Now, looking at some of the other districts, what I see is, for example, one county has a managerial, what they call a managerial exempt category, and they create a managerial exempt committee that annually looks at salaries for non-educational positions in industry and make recommendations about changes. So that, and then another is, we've been approving appointments with market rate in the job description, and we're not seeing what the market rate is. So we're effectively approving salaries, but we don't even know what the salary compensation is going to be. Most of them that I looked at have in their policy that there's some sort of administrative procedure that is documented, that is inherent in that policy. And so when I got, one of the questions I've had with Dr. Savage is, what is the documented administrative procedure that's being used as we, make some of these appointments? Some counties have vacancy screening teams and then interview teams, and the same people can't be on them. Some counties have probationary periods for all new hires. A contract for 1 year, and at will, you can be dismissed within that year. One county, I think it's Duval, they structure their compensation for external equity, which talks about the market, internal equity, which is across level, and then what they call individual equity, which is effectively your effectiveness in your position, your seniority in your position, whatever. So I think there are lots of different models out there, but when I look at policy 5.021, which I think is the policy that talks about compensation, it says that, in effect, the board is responsible for approving those, and we're not. So I think we have something to address, and I'm going to look at Attorney Dupree-Bruno, because she heard a little bit about this from me earlier.
So thank you, Ms. Morgan. 5.021 is the policy that specifically addresses the compensation. Now, the one thing that the board should remember is that you guys have something called Administrative Schedule N that comes before the board. And that Administrative Schedule N outlines the processes for the market rate, for example. It outlines what, for this particular, for example, chief level, here's what the range is. So that's in that Administrative Schedule N, which does come before the board. Now, I can take a look at some of those other policies to see what is lacking and see where we stand in terms of other districts and how they do that.
But I think, though, that schedule, what you just referred to, the Schedule N, it has a beginning and an ending. So if a person's walking in, you would, hopefully, I would hope that you're not going to the highest part of that Schedule N, because I'm just now walking in. How do I get that? How do I take it to that very end level? So I think that's something that we need to be seeing too, because that to me is ridiculous. Ms. Gittens?
Well, and my understanding of two things. First of all, I think we should discuss this tomorrow, and the superintendent will be here to discuss his intent. However, My understanding of that was not that he was changing, but in researching it, there were some positions and some levels that were not in line with the process, the market process and all that was stated. And I do know, goodness, that was what, in 2018 when they, in December when they did those executive raises, and I had asked several times for more information about why that happened, and honestly never got the detailed information. They said that it had been shown to us. In one meeting, there was a document that was shown, but we never got that document in hand. So my understanding of that letter is that what we thought we were doing was not happening, and therefore he was bringing it up to make sure that everything was in line, not so much changing it and making a whole different process. But like I said, wait until he is
So
here.
then, no, I think that's a great, well, does anybody else have anything to address Ms.
Yeah,
Vaughn?
I think what Ms. Morgan said is really important. I would like to see some kind of okay, so I'm trying to think tomorrow what's, just off the top of my head, what's on our agenda. It seems to me that there's going to be a lot that goes into Dr. Savage explaining where he's coming from, maybe having the kind of data, the research that Ms. Morgan did at our fingertips to know, well, this one's doing, because obviously there are a lot of different ways this is handled at different ones of the large school district. So to me, it's a very important, timely topic. Is there time in our schedule?
Yeah, tomorrow, yeah, the briefing, you have, I think tomorrow we actually would have time to do that. And again, it depends on if everybody can stay to the 3 minutes and conversations, we probably could get through all that. Because we have the 2 policies that we'll be speaking on, the capital project updates, change order, and then the mitigation measures is what they will be discussing on what is intact right now. So that is scheduled for 90 minutes, and that's it. So, Ms. Vaughn, you pretty much keep everything at the 3 minutes, so I don't see how we...
It just depends, not always.
I think you could bring
the only reason I'm thinking about that is it seems to me that we as a board would need to have a little bit of time to really look over the kind of research that has been done by Mrs. Morgan, or maybe do a little of our own research on it. I'm just saying that I don't want to discuss it.
Well, if we could put it on our next workshop.
I don't know, whatever the rest of the board feels on it, but obviously we need Dr. Savage here to express where he was coming from with it. But I actually would love to see how other districts are dealing with this important question.
So, Ms. Morgan, I know you just brought that up. Is that something that, I don't know if you could share that information that you...
yeah, actually, I probably can, because
you have, or have Ms. Thomas or Ms. Roman, because I think that when we are looking at all that, we do need to look at how people are compensated for sure, because, I mean, we have people, I'm going to say right in front of them, in our office who are administrative assistants. They're not secretaries.
Right.
They do so much work that's well beyond, and I'm not sure what schedule they're on, but I think that we need to be looking at all that to see where we're at. So if we could have that at maybe at one of our next meetings, that way we can schedule the allotted time for that. And if you possibly could send that information out to us, or have one of the ladies send that out to us, and then that way it will give us more time to digest and get the information that we may need as well. And
Yeah, and that's fine. I'd just like to hear from Dr. Savage, if there has been a change in strategy, I mean, tomorrow. But other than that, I'm happy to provide information to you all, and then we'll schedule a meeting. And then, once you see what I have, you may want to reach out to other districts and find out
Sure.
what their policy or procedures are to support their policies.
Oh, thank you. And I'm going to go to Ms. Fisher, and then I'm coming back to you, Ms. Gittens. Ms. Fisher?
Yes, so, yeah, I would definitely agree with Mrs. Morgan that we need to have a conversation. And my concern, having had my appointment this morning with Ray and Associates regarding the superintendent search and the input from our stakeholder groups, et cetera, I would like to go back and have a conversation as a board about some of the things that we agreed on as far as reorganization and hiring positions and things like that, because I feel like we said, let's hold up and stop and slow this down, and then we come up with all of these changes which are happening, and I don't know that we've had adequate communication and time to review the recommendations. So I think I'd like to also include some conversation with Dr. Savage regarding communication with the board and keeping us informed well enough so that we can make adequate decisions and that we can represent the public adequately and make sure that we are following the rules as far as process and recommendations in hiring and retaining employees.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Ms. Gittens?
Well, I don't know if it's a differing opinion, but I do have an opinion about especially about our superintendent search process. And if you recall in the very beginning when Dr. Atkins left, I consistently said we need to move on getting a company and moving forward. And the majority of the board said, no, we've got plenty of time. And then all of a sudden, to me, when certain things began to happen, it became an urgency. I understand the timing as far as, getting the attention of superintendents out there that may want to apply for the position. But I just want to make sure we're not rushing through the process just because things may not be going exactly as, you expected. So now let's rush through this. I hope we don't have that mindset and we do take our time in making this selection. I'm hearing from the community as well, when are they really going to have their input, and are there going to be community groups? Because it's still kind of, and I haven't had my meeting with them yet, but one of the things that concerns me is we all gave groups of community groups that are already formed. Where is the general public? Where is the general? We've got 2 days, and during those 2 days, it's going to be, this group and this chamber and this whatever. But when do we hear from the parents? When do we hear from certain just everyday people in this district that are taxpayers? If we limit it to certain groups that we have chosen, I don't see the equity.
I can help you with some of that. So we have, surveys have gone out to everybody. Everybody has a survey. So that is one way of there's multiple levels and ways of communication. So that has gone out to everybody multiple times. So we have that going on. There are groups that people have asked to incorporate. So those groups have been pulled together. They have been asked to come in. There's actually 3 days. So they will be coming in on their time. There's a lot that's going to be Zoom, and that's 300 people per Zoom meeting that we can have. So if you think about 300 people times 4, that's a lot of people that can come to these, where they have the option to go to those as well. And then you have the community ones, and then you have the parent one. So there's 6 different opportunities for you to be engaged with this.
And I understand that. I do know that, all the different groups that they will have. But I also understand there are a lot of people, and I did speak to Ray and Associates about the verbiage of the 31 choices. It is very academia. And so when people that may not have that level of academia read that, it can be confusing, and they start and then they just stop. And I've had people say, well, I would do it, but I don't quite understand. It is more of a psychological type test that, if I want to know how you do something, I ask you 3 different ways in the same list of questions. So some people are saying, well, it's all the same. They keep asking the same question. I just feel like we're going to miss a demographic. And to say that we have a survey out there and it's been out there for everyone, I don't know that that's it. But
Well, the survey's there for a month, so it's a month-long survey. Right now, the English, and we're hitting Creole, Spanish, English.
yes, I understand.
Board members just received, I sent that out to you all
I
today
understand,
to
yes.
fill out yours. But we're looking at, and they were impressed about the numbers. So we have, over 5,000 who have already responded to us, and that was of Friday, over 5,000 that have turned in their surveys. Ms. Fisher?
Yeah, so we as a board chose Ray and Associates because of their reputation. And we agreed to the timeline that they provided us. And they are not only personally contacting us, but they're also contacting people in the community whose names and groups were given to them by us. And they have a history of being very successful with superintendent searches, and they have people reach out to them. I checked on their website en masse, like monthly. So we also advertised nationally that we were advertising for an interim superintendent, which is a temporary position that is in the current contract, that it is an interim and temporary position. And we also said at that time that we wanted to be sure that anyone who applied for that interim temporary position would not be considered for a longer-term position. So the average tenure of a Florida superintendent is 2.5 to 3 years. So when we say permanent, that's optimistic, but hopefully it will be somebody who will be here long enough to give us some stability and consistency. And I don't see where we're rushing anything, because we all agreed on the timeline and agreed to let the Ray and Associates do the work, because that's their job, that's what they do. And some of us on the board did not want any assistance from any of our internal departments like HR. So I don't think that we can change midstream and maintain the trust of the community. And I think we have to go with the process now, because that is what we agreed on. And so, and honestly, rushing is not the point, because we have got a lot of unrest. We are losing a lot of people in this district, and I don't know that it can be too many more weeks or months before we have a leader in place who's going to bring some stability to this district.
Yeah, and I also want to say too, we did receive the list from everybody. However, we received a list, no contact, so I spent an entire day with the ladies just looking up everybody's emails. And just even when you get with all the, goodness, just the elected officials in this area with everyone, because it's like Fort Myers Beach, Estero, Bonito, you have to think of every single person, lift up those rocks, make sure that we're getting everybody so we're not missing anybody. All the different, the churches, the community organizations. I mean, that has been, it's been a week of researching and getting all those addresses and the right people to send that to send it out to the appropriate people as well. Ms. Gittens?
Yes,
Dr. Mack, Ms. Fisher.
I'm sorry, I do have to respond to Ms. Fisher. I am not in any way, shape, or form saying we need to throw out this process. I am not saying that I do not trust Ray and Associates. I was making a comment that we were moving quite quickly. Most of the districts that I have talked to, and we don't even know. In January, we may get it down to 1 or 2 people who may say they're interested, and in the end, they decide to do something else. We don't know if at the end of January, we'll have somebody that's going to sit in that position. So I'm not talking about throwing that all out. But I do think we need to be very aware of the fact that in this time next year, there will be an item on the ballot as to whether the superintendent position will be an elected position in '24. So we're talking about having someone hire someone in January of '22 that could very well be running their own campaign in another year, because you have to start ahead of that. So we have to make sure that, we understand it's smooth right now, and going through it, we may find some hiccups, because you got to find someone that may be willing to take it for a year and a half before they have to run for office. That's just a reality. And I'm not saying throw out the process at all.
Ms. Fisher?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, and back to Ms. Gitten's point about reaching the hard-to-reach population, Ray and Associates did say that they are making every effort to do that and have already identified some groups in hard-to-reach areas, and also have included 3 student groups, which made me feel extremely optimistic about the process. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. You're fine. Is it 4 o'clock? Mr. Pre-Bruno?
I have none, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Spiro?
Just wanted to say thank you very much for having me today, and I do want to say to everybody that's in the front lines at our schools, I just want to say thank you very much for everything they do every day. You're very much appreciated. That's all I have. Thank you.
Well, and we want to say thank you for sharing with us today. We appreciate you being here. I look forward to you being here, up here again with us someday. So, seeing no other business to come before this board, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. We'll be back tomorrow.